The millionaire fired the housekeeper accused of theft, but her words brought him to his knees. The steady beep of hospital monitors pierced the sterile silence as Emily Thompson stood beside her mother's bed, her trembling fingers clutching a diamond necklace worth more than their entire life savings. Sarah Thompson's face was pale against the stark white hospital sheets, her breathing shallow and labored. The prestigious St. Mary's Hospital private room, paid for by a man Emily had only known as her employer until yesterday, felt like a cruel reminder of the life they could have had. "I won't let you die," Mom Emily whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Not when I finally found a way to save you." 24 hours earlier, Emily had been straightening her maid's uniform in the grand foyer of the Parker mansion, just as she had done every morning for the past 3 years. The diamond necklace that now seemed to burn in her pocket had been sitting innocently in Victoria Parker's jewelry box, a symbol of wealth and privilege that Emily had polished countless times before. "Where is it?" Victoria's shrill voice had echoed through the mansion's marble halls. "I want every inch of this house searched." Emily had frozen at the top of the grand staircase, her heart pounding as Victoria rounded the corner, her perfectly manicured hand gripping the banister. Behind her, Mrs. Hudson, the head housekeeper, looked uncharacteristically flustered. Victoria's ice blue eyes had locked onto Emily. "Where were you this morning?" "I was cleaning the foyer, Mrs. Parker." As always, Emily had replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The accusation had come swift and brutal. The missing necklace, Richard Parker's anniversary gift to Victoria, worth more than all the staff's yearly salaries combined. The suspicious glances, the whispered conversations, the quiet doubt in even Mrs. Hudson's eyes, it had all crushed Emily's spirit in mere moments. But it was Richard Parker's entrance that had changed everything. He had stood there, distinguished in his tailored suit, his silver hair and strong features a testament to old money and power. But there was something in his eyes as he looked at Emily, something that had always been there. She realized now, a mixture of guilt, recognition, and an impossible truth. "Richard," Victoria had hissed, "your anniversary gift, the diamond necklace. It's gone, and I'm certain this girl took it." The moment had stretched like glass about to shatter. Richard Parker's gaze had moved from his wife to Emily, and in that instant something broke inside him. "No," he had said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "No, she didn't take it." "How can you be so sure?" Victoria had demanded. Because Richard's voice had cracked slightly. "She's my daughter." The silence that followed had been deafening. Emily had felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Memories flooding her mind, her mother's sad smiles whenever she asked about her father, the familiar ache of absence during father-daughter dances, the strange connection she had always felt to this house. "That's impossible," Victoria had whispered, her face draining of color. But looking at Richard Parker, at her father, Emily had known it was true. She saw her own eyes staring back at her, the same determined set of the jaw, the same subtle cleft in the chin. Now, standing in the hospital room, Emily understood the true weight of that revelation. The necklace in her pocket wasn't stolen, it was planted. Victoria's accusation wasn't about theft, it was about erasing a threat to her perfect world. And her mother's mysterious illness? The timing seemed far too convenient. The door opened behind her, and Emily turned to face Richard Parker, her father, still uncomfortable with the word even in her thoughts. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his face haggard with worry. "Emily," he said softly, "we need to talk. There's more you need to know. About your mother, about Victoria, about why I left all those years ago." He paused, his voice breaking. "About the family you were born into, and the lengths some people will go to protect their secrets." Emily looked at her mother's unconscious form, then back at Richard. In her pocket, the diamond necklace felt like a key, not just to the truth, but to a door she wasn't sure she wanted to open. But her mother's life hung in the balance, and Emily knew there was no turning back. The game of wealth, power, and long-buried secrets had already begun, and she was now a player whether she wanted to be or not. The one-bedroom apartment on Cedar Street had never felt smaller than when Sarah Thompson's coughing fits echoed off its thin walls. Emily would lie awake at night, counting the seconds between each labored breath from the next room, her mind racing with calculations about medical bills and overtime hours at the Parker mansion. Their lives hadn't always been defined by illness and financial struggle. Emily remembered a time when Sarah's laughter filled their tiny home, when her mother's hands didn't shake as she braided Emily's hair before school. Sarah had worked as a literature teacher at the local high school, sharing her passion for Shakespeare and Austen with bright-eyed students. Her mother's eyes would light up as she recounted stories of classroom breakthroughs and student achievements over their modest dinner table. Everything changed 3 years ago when Sarah first collapsed during class. The diagnosis had been devastating, a rare autoimmune condition that slowly attacked her vital organs. The medical bills began piling up, insurance coverage proved insufficient, and Sarah's teaching career came to an abrupt end. Emily, fresh out of community college, had put her own dreams on hold to become their sole provider. "You shouldn't sacrifice your future for me," Sarah would protest weakly, watching Emily rush between multiple jobs. But Emily would simply smile, adjusting her mother's blankets or organizing the growing collection of prescription bottles on the nightstand. Their daily routine had become a careful dance of necessity. Emily would wake before dawn, prepare her mother's medications, make enough soup to last the day, and then head to her job at the Parker mansion. During her lunch breaks, she would call to check on Sarah, her heart always racing until her mother answered. Evenings were spent either picking up extra shifts at the local diner or sitting beside Sarah's bed, reading from the worn copies of classic novels they had collected from second-hand bookstores over the years. The small box of photographs on their coffee table told the story of happier times. There was Sarah, young and radiant, holding baby Emily on a park bench. Another showed them at Emily's high school graduation, both beaming with pride. But it was the single photo tucked in the back that Emily found herself studying more and more her mother as a young woman, standing in front of a country club, her smile carefree and in love. The edge of the photo was torn, as if someone had been carefully removed from the image. Sarah rarely spoke about Emily's father, and Emily had learned to stop asking. The pain in her mother's eyes whenever the subject arose told her enough. "Some loves aren't meant to last," Sarah would say softly, turning away to hide her tears. "But they give us the most beautiful gifts." She would always touch Emily's cheek then, a gesture full of both love and unspoken regret. Their apartment walls were lined with bookshelves, Sarah's most prized possessions. Even as they sold furniture and jewelry to cover medical expenses, the books remained. Knowledge and stories are the one thing they can't take from us, Sarah would say, running her fingers along the spines of her beloved classics. The books had become their escape, their way of traveling beyond the confines of their circumstances. But despite their struggles, Sarah had managed to give Emily a childhood filled with love and imagination. They may not have had fancy vacations or new clothes, but they had midnight fairy tale readings, homemade Halloween costumes, and Christmas mornings where creativity made up for what they lacked in expensive gifts. Sarah had taught Emily that true wealth lay in the heart's capacity to love and find joy in simple pleasures. Now, watching her mother's health deteriorate day by day, Emily felt the weight of their shared past and uncertain future. The medicine cabinet grew fuller, the medical bills higher, and Sarah's once vibrant spirit dimmer. Yet even in their darkest moments, Sarah would reach for Emily's hand and whisper, "My greatest achievement was raising you, my love. Never forget that." Little did Emily know that her position at the Parker mansion wasn't just a job, it was destiny's way of bringing her closer to the truth about her own story, a truth that would change everything they thought they knew about love, sacrifice, and family. The Parker mansion stood as a monument to old money and power, its limestone facade and manicured gardens a stark contrast to the modest homes that surrounded it. Through the wrought iron gates, a world of privilege unfolded, one where crystal chandeliers cast rainbow shadows across marble floors, and antique furniture worth fortunes gathered dust in unused rooms. Richard Parker commanded this domain with the quiet authority of a self-made man who had married into old money. His marriage to Victoria had been a calculated merger of new wealth and established social standing. Victoria Parker, née Blackwood, came from a family whose roots in high society ran as deep as the oak trees lining their driveway. Their union had been celebrated in social pages as the perfect match, his business acumen and her social connections creating an unstoppable force in Boston's elite circles. The staff moved through the mansion like shadows, trained to be invisible yet indispensable. Mrs. Hudson, the head housekeeper, ran the household with military precision, her steel-grey hair always perfectly coiffed, her black dress pressed to perfection. Under her watchful eye, an army of maids, butlers and groundskeepers maintained the Parkers' carefully curated world. Victoria ruled her domain from her private sitting room, where she held court with other socialites, planning charity galas and judging those who didn't meet their exacting standards. Her perfectly manicured nails, always painted blood red, would tap impatiently on antique side tables when things weren't done to her satisfaction. The staff learned quickly that Mrs. Parker's displeasure could cost them their positions. But it was in the quiet moments, when Victoria thought no one was watching, that her mask would slip. She would stand before the grand mirror in the foyer, practicing her smile until it looked genuine. Her hand would often drift to her flat stomach, a gesture loaded with unspoken disappointment, the Parker air she had failed to provide. Richard spent most of his time in his study, surrounded by leather-bound books and the weight of expectations. From behind his mahogany desk, he built and maintained the Parker fortune through calculated decisions and strategic alliances. Yet there was something in his eyes, a sadness that no amount of wealth could erase. The staff often heard him pacing late at night, his footsteps echoing through the empty halls. The Parker family portraits lined the main staircase, telling a story of power and privilege passed down through generations. Stern-faced patriarchs and elegant matriarchs stared down at passing servants, their eyes seeming to judge whether one was worthy of walking their halls. The latest edition showed Richard and Victoria, perfectly posed yet somehow distant even in a photograph. Timothy, Victoria's beloved Maltese dog, was treated with more consideration than most of the staff. The pampered pet had his own room, complete with a miniature four-poster bed and a wardrobe of custom-made outfits. Victoria doted on the dog as if it were the child she never had, while Richard watched with barely concealed disdain. The mansion's gardens, meticulously maintained by James Montgomery, provided a rare glimpse of genuine beauty amidst the manufactured perfection. James, with his quiet dignity and skilled hands, created spaces of natural wonder that even Victoria couldn't find fault with. His cottage at the edge of the property served as a humble reminder of the class divide that defined life at the Parker estate. Weekly staff meetings in the basement kitchen revealed the true pulse of the household. Here, away from the watchful eyes of the Parkers, alliances were formed, secrets were traded, and the real story of the mansion unfolded. They whispered about Victoria's mysterious phone calls, Richard's late-night visitors, and the tension that seemed to grow thicker with each passing day. But it was the locked room on the third floor that spawned the most speculation. No one, not even Mrs. Hudson, had seen inside in years. Victoria claimed it was simply storage, but the way Richard's eyes lingered on the door when he passed suggested otherwise. Some said it contained evidence of past scandals, others believed it held the key to the Parker family's true history. In this carefully orchestrated world of wealth and pretense, Emily Thompson moved like a ghost, dusting priceless artifacts and polishing silver, unaware that she was closer to the heart of the Parker legacy than anyone could have imagined. Summer of 1995 painted the Oak Ridge Country Club in hues of gold and promise. Richard Parker, fresh from business school and working as a golf instructor, to appease his father's demand that he learn the value of hard work first, saw Sarah Thompson on a sun-drenched morning. She was there with her family, wearing a simple white sundress that caught the breeze, her laughter carrying across the perfectly manicured greens. Sarah wasn't like the other young women who frequented the club. As the daughter of a local literature professor, she spent her summers working in the club's library, surrounded by books rather than gossiping by the pool. Her intelligence and quiet confidence drew Richard like a moth to flame. He would find excuses to visit the library, pretending to research golf techniques while stealing glances at her over leather-bound volumes. Their first real conversation happened during a sudden summer storm. Sarah was struggling to protect a cart of books from the rain when Richard appeared with an umbrella. They spent the next hour reorganizing the library's weather-damaged materials, talking about everything and nothing. Richard discovered a world beyond profit margins and social obligations in Sarah's passionate discussions about literature and life. Their romance bloomed in secret corners of the club grounds. Behind the old oak tree near the 9th hole, they shared their first kiss. In the quiet of the library after closing, Sarah would read poetry to Richard, opening his eyes to the beauty of words. They dreamed of a future together, making plans over packed lunches in the groundskeeper's garden, far from prying eyes. But their different worlds were destined to collide. William Parker, Richard's father, had already orchestrated his son's path, a merger marriage with Victoria Blackwood, joining two of Boston's most prominent families. When whispers of Richard's involvement with that library girl reached William's ears, the response was swift and merciless. Sarah's father was quietly informed that his position at the university could become complicated if his daughter continued her relationship with Richard. The Blackwoods, with their extensive connections, made it clear that Sarah's future career in academia would be over before it began. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. One rainy evening, Richard was summoned to his father's study. The leather chairs and dark wood paneling seemed to close in as William Parker laid out the facts the family business was in trouble. Only the merger with the Blackwoods could save their legacy, and Sarah would never be accepted in their world. "You have a responsibility to this family," William had said, his voice cold as steel. "Love doesn't pay bills, son. It doesn't maintain social standing. It doesn't secure futures." That night, Richard made the hardest decision of his life. He met Sarah by their oak tree, the same place where their love had first blossomed. The words felt like ashes in his mouth as he told her they couldn't be together, that their worlds were too different, that some dreams weren't meant to come true. Sarah stood there in the gathering darkness, rain mixing with her tears. "I don't care about money or status," she had whispered. "I care about you," but Richard forced himself to walk away, each step feeling like a knife in his heart. What Richard didn't know, what he wouldn't discover for decades, was that Sarah was already carrying their child. She disappeared from the club the next day, leaving nothing but a single book of poetry on her library desk. Inside, unmarked, was a sonnet about love lost and the courage to carry on. The Blackwood-Parker wedding 3 months later was the social event of the season. Victoria was resplendent in designer white, the papers praised the union of two great families, and Richard smiled for the cameras while his heart turned to stone. He buried himself in work, built his empire, and tried to forget the sound of Sarah's laughter on summer afternoons. In the decades that followed, Richard would sometimes find himself outside the university library where Sarah's father had once worked, wondering about the life he could have had. But duty and family expectations had won out over love, leaving behind a wound that would take 25 years and a chance encounter with a young maid who had his eyes to finally begin healing. Victoria Parker stood before her dressing room mirror, meticulously applying her signature red lipstick. At 48, she remained striking, her blonde hair expertly colored and styled, her designer clothes hiding the toll that years of desperate attempts at motherhood had taken on her body. Behind her polished exterior lay a woman haunted by the whispers of Boston society, the sidelong glances when yet another year passed without a Parker heir. James Montgomery tended the Parker estate's gardens with the same care he'd shown for the past 5 years. At 32, his weathered hands and quiet demeanor belied a sharp mind that had earned him a degree in environmental science. The son of Thomas Montgomery, who had died saving Richard Parker from a car accident 20 years ago, James carried the weight of his father's sacrifice with dignified silence. Richard had ensured James's education was paid for, a debt that tied the young man to the Parker estate in ways beyond employment. Mrs. Hudson, born Margaret Hudson, had served the Parker family for 3 decades. Her stern exterior masked a heart that had witnessed both the family's triumphs and darkest secrets. She was the keeper of keys, both literal and figurative, her black dress and impeccable posture a constant presence in the mansion's daily life. At 65, she had become more than a housekeeper, she was the mansion's memory. William Parker, at 78, still commanded respect despite his advanced age. From his wheelchair in the family's city apartment, he continued to pull strings in Boston's high society. His wife, Eleanor Parker, maintained their social obligations with automated precision, her pill-enhanced smile never quite reaching her eyes. They represented the old guard of the Parker dynasty, their influence casting long shadows over Richard's decisions. Dr. Michael Anderson served as the Parker family's private physician, his discretion bought with generous donations to his research foundation. He had treated 3 generations of Parkers, his silence about their medical histories as valuable as his medical expertise. His involvement in Sarah's mysterious illness would soon raise questions he couldn't answer. Benjamin Blackwood, Victoria's older brother, lurked at the edges of the family drama. A corporate lawyer with connections throughout Boston's legal system, he had helped bury more than one Parker family scandal. His loyalty to his sister bordered on obsession, his methods of problem-solving growing increasingly dangerous as the stakes rose. Grace Chen, Emily's closest friend and fellow maid at the mansion, provided a clear-eyed perspective on the household's dynamics. At 25, she balanced night classes in nursing with her work, her dream of a better life matching Emily's own aspirations. Her keen observations would prove invaluable as events unfolded. Timothy, though not human, played a crucial role in the household dynamics. Victoria's Maltese dog had become a symbol of her maternal frustrations, his pampered existence a sharp contrast to the staff's working conditions. His unexplained agitation around certain areas of the mansion would later prove significant. The ghost of Thomas Montgomery, James's father, haunted the estate, not in supernatural form but through photographs, memories, and the debt Richard felt he could never repay. His sacrifice had created a complex web of obligation and guilt that bound James to the Parker family. Detective Laura Martinez would enter the story when Victoria's schemes took a dark turn. A veteran of Boston's police force, her instincts about the wealthy family she investigated had been honed by years of experience. Her involvement would begin with a simple theft report but would uncover far more than anyone anticipated. Father Patrick O'Malley, the Parker family's longtime confessor at St. Matthew's Church, carried the burden of decades of Parker secrets heard through the confessional screen. His moral struggle between religious obligation and human conscience would become increasingly relevant as events unfolded. These characters orbited the central drama of Richard, Sarah, Emily, and Victoria, each playing crucial roles in the unfolding story of identity, inheritance, and redemption. Their interactions, motivated by love, duty, revenge, and redemption, would weave together to create a tapestry of human emotion and consequence that would forever change the Parker legacy. The morning that would shatter Emily Thompson's world began like any other at the Parker mansion. Sunlight streamed through leaded glass windows, casting prismatic patterns across the marble floor she had polished countless times. The household stirred to life as staff members went about their morning routines, their footsteps echoing through the grand halls. Emily had just finished arranging fresh flowers in the main foyer when Victoria Parker's voice cut through the morning calm like a knife. "Where is it?" the shrill demand echoed off the high ceilings. "My anniversary necklace is missing." The sound of heels clicking against marble grew louder as Victoria descended the grand staircase, her face contorted with rage. But Mrs. Hudson appeared immediately, her usually unflappable demeanor showing signs of strain. "Mrs. Parker, perhaps you simply misplaced." "Misplaced $100,000 diamond necklace." Victoria's laugh was brittle. "Don't be absurd. Someone took it, and I want every member of the staff in the main hall. Now." Within minutes, the mansion staff stood lined up like soldiers awaiting inspection. Emily felt her heart racing as Victoria paced before them, her red-soled shoes clicking ominously against the floor. The weight of 24 gazes pressed down on them, other servants, security personnel, and various members of the household staff. "The necklace was in my jewelry box last night," Victoria announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast room. "This morning it's gone. Someone in this room knows what happened to it." Her eyes swept the line of staff members, lingering pointedly on Emily. Grace Chen, standing next to Emily, shifted slightly closer in silent support. But the gesture didn't go unnoticed by Victoria. "You," Victoria snapped, pointing at Emily. "Where were you this morning between 6 and 7? Emily's voice trembled despite her efforts to remain calm. "I was cleaning the foyer, Mrs. Parker, as I do every morning." Alone, Victoria's smile was predatory. "How convenient. And did your cleaning take you near my private quarters?" "No, ma'am. I haven't been upstairs yet today." Victoria turned to Mrs. Hudson, who has access to the upper floor master suite. "Only myself and the assigned upstairs maid," which is Mrs. Hudson hesitated, her eyes flickering to Emily. "Which is Miss Thompson," Victoria finished triumphantly. "Empty your pockets, all of you. Now." The humiliation of being searched in front of the entire household staff burned through Emily. One by one, they turned out their pockets, opened their bags, submitted to pat-downs by the security team. When they reached Emily, Victoria insisted on overseeing the search personally. "What's this?" Victoria's hand emerged from Emily's apron pocket, holding a folded piece of paper. With theatrical flourish, she opened it. A photograph fell out, the same one Emily kept of her mother in her younger days at the country club. Victoria's eyes narrowed as she studied the photograph, something flickering across her face before she quickly composed herself. Well, well, it seems Miss Thompson has been harboring quite an interest in the past." She turned to the assembled staff. "Did you all know our little maid here has been collecting old photographs of the country club? Rather odd hobby for someone of her position, wouldn't you say?" Emily felt her face burning. "That's my mother. It has nothing to do with." Silence. Victoria cut her off. "Search her locker. Search everything." The next 30 minutes were a blur of humiliation. Emily stood rooted to the spot as security guards rifled through her personal belongings in front of everyone. Victoria orchestrated the spectacle like a conductor, making sure every embarrassing detail was displayed for all to see. And then came the moment that sealed Emily's fate. In her locker, tucked inside her spare uniform, they found the diamond necklace, its stones catching the morning light in a betraying sparkle. The gasp that went through the assembled staff was audible. Emily felt the floor sway beneath her feet. "That's not. I didn't." "Call the police," Victoria commanded, her voice ringing with satisfaction. "We have a thief in our midst." It was at that moment that Richard Parker finally appeared, drawn by the commotion. He took in the scene: Emily's tears, Victoria's triumphant stance, the necklace dangling from the security guard's hand. "What's going on here?" His deep voice cut through the chaos. But But before anyone could respond, another voice spoke up from the back of the crowd. "I can tell you exactly what's going on, Mr. Parker." Grace Chen stepped forward, her face set with determination. "I saw Mrs. Parker in the staff locker room early this morning, before anyone else arrived. She had that necklace in her hand." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's face went from red to white in an instant. "How dare you? You're fired, both of you. Get out of my house." But Richard Parker raised his hand, his eyes fixed on Emily's face with an intensity that made the room hold its breath. "No," he said quietly. "No one is going anywhere until we get to the truth. All of it." Victoria Parker retreated to her private sitting room in the aftermath of the confrontation, her perfectly manicured fingers trembling as she dialed her brother's number. Benjamin Blackwood answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting for her call. "It's falling apart," Victoria whispered, her voice tight with controlled panic. "That little maid, there's something about her." The way Richard looked at her, she paused, collecting herself. "Benjamin, I need you to do what we discussed." The plan had been months in the making. Victoria had first noticed the resemblance between Emily and Richard during last year's Christmas party. The girl had been serving champagne, and for a moment caught in profile, she was the spitting image of a young Sarah Thompson. Victoria had recognized her immediately. She never forgot a threat to her position. "The doctor has been taken care of," Benjamin assured her. "Sarah Thompson's medical records have been adjusted. As far as anyone can tell, her condition is completely natural, untraceable." Victoria moved to her dressing table, studying her reflection in the antique mirror. "And the medication?" "Being delivered to her pharmacy as we speak. The side effects will manifest slowly. Nothing suspicious, just a gradual decline. By the time anyone thinks to investigate, there won't be anything to find." The scheme had been elegantly simple. Sarah Thompson's mysterious illness, the mounting medical bills that kept Emily dependent on her job at the mansion, the carefully orchestrated theft accusation, all pieces of a puzzle designed to remove Emily from their lives before Richard could discover the truth. But Grace Chen's unexpected intervention had thrown everything into chaos. Victoria hadn't counted on the quiet observation skills of a mere maid. Now, she needed to accelerate her plans. "What about the pregnancy announcement?" Benjamin asked, his tone businesslike. Victoria touched her flat stomach, a bitter smile playing across her lips. "The fertility clinic has provided all the necessary documentation. Dr. Anderson will confirm it. He knows what's at stake. His research funding depends on our family's continued generosity." The fake pregnancy was her masterstroke. Victoria had watched Richard's growing interest in Emily with mounting dread. A long-lost daughter could threaten her position, but a new Parker heir. That would cement her place in the family forever. "Richard's always wanted a child," she continued. "Once I announce the pregnancy, he'll be too preoccupied with the future to dig into the past. And if any accidents should befall our dear Emily in the meantime." She left the sentence hanging. Benjamin's voice hardened. "The young gardener, James Montgomery, he's becoming a problem. He's been asking questions about his father's accident. About the night Richard was supposedly saved." Victoria's hand tightened on the phone. Another loose end that needed tying. "Handle it," she commanded, "but carefully. We don't need another martyred Montgomery." She moved to her wall safe, entering the combination with practiced ease. Inside lay a stack of old photographs, evidence of past indiscretions, leverage accumulated over years of careful observation. Among them was a particularly damning image: Richard and Sarah at the country club, young and in love. Victoria had removed herself from Emily's copied version, but kept the original as insurance. "What about Grace Chen?" Benjamin asked. "She's a liability now." Victoria withdrew the photograph, studying it in the afternoon light. "Have our friends at the immigration office review her family's paperwork. I'm sure they'll find some discrepancies." The sound of footsteps in the hallway made Victoria quickly return the photograph to the safe. "Someone's coming." Remember, the pregnancy announcement needs to happen before Richard can verify Emily's identity. And Benjamin, make sure Sarah Thompson's next batch of medication is properly prepared. She ended the call just as a knock sounded at her door. "Come in," she called, her voice perfectly modulated to hide any trace of her schemes. Mrs. Hudson entered, her face carefully neutral. "Mr. Parker would like to see you in his study, ma'am, regarding this morning's incident." Victoria stood, smoothing her designer dress. "Of course. Tell him I'll be right there." As Mrs. Hudson turned to leave, Victoria added, "Oh, and Margaret, remember who signs your pension checks." The threat was subtle but clear. Mrs. Hudson's shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly before she nodded and withdrew. Alone again, Victoria checked her reflection one final time. Her hand strayed to the drawer where she kept her most powerful weapon, a small red notebook containing 25 years of Parker family secrets. If Richard pushed too hard, she would make sure the fallout destroyed everyone. But "You should have stayed in your place, Emily Thompson," she whispered to her reflection. "Now you'll learn what happens to people who threaten what's mine." Richard Parker stood at the window of his study, watching Emily and Grace leave the mansion through the service entrance. His reflection in the glass showed a man torn between duty and truth, power and love. 25 years of carefully constructed facades were crumbling around him, all because of a young woman with Sarah's gentle spirit and his own determined chin. The leather-bound volume of Shakespeare's sonnets on his desk, Sarah's parting gift all those years ago, seemed to mock him. He had kept it hidden in his private safe, along with the only photograph he had of her. Now, looking at Emily's face in his mind, he wondered how he had been so blind for so long. "You wanted to see me, darling?" Victoria's voice cut through his thoughts. She entered the study with practiced grace, but Richard caught the calculating look in her eyes before she could mask it. "The necklace," he said quietly, not turning from the window. "We both know Emily didn't steal it." Victoria's reflection joined his in the window. "Do we? The evidence seems quite clear." Enough. Richard's fist came down on his desk with surprising force. "I've let this charade go on long enough. I've let you manipulate this household, control our lives with your schemes and threats, but not anymore." He finally turned to face his wife of 25 years, the woman who had helped him build his empire, who had stood beside him at countless social functions, who had turned their marriage into a business arrangement so gradually he hardly noticed it happening. "What are you talking about?" Richard. Victoria's voice was dangerous and soft. "Sarah Thompson's daughter," he said, watching Victoria's face carefully. "My daughter. But you already knew that, didn't you? You've known all along." Victoria's composure slipped for just a moment. "Don't be ridiculous. That girl is nothing but a common thief who looks exactly like her mother." Richard opened his safe and withdrew the old photograph. "The same mother who disappeared from the country club 25 years ago. The same summer your family mysteriously solved all my father's financial problems." The silence between them grew thick with unspoken accusations. Richard continued, his voice heavy with realization. "Sarah's illness, the timing of Emily's employment here, the convenient discovery of the necklace. It's all been orchestrated, hasn't it?" But Victoria's laugh was brittle. "You're becoming paranoid, darling. Perhaps you need a vacation." "I've already called my lawyer," Richard cut her off, "and a private investigator. Sarah's medical records, Emily's background, your brother's involvement, I want everything investigated." The change in Victoria was instant and chilling. Her society smile dropped away, replaced by something harder, more dangerous. "Think very carefully about what you're doing, Richard. I've kept your secrets for 25 years. The real story behind Thomas Montgomery's death. The creative accounting that saved your father's company. The things you've done to protect the Parker name." "I don't care anymore," Richard said, and was surprised to find it was true. No more secrets, no more lies. I lost Sarah once because I was too weak to stand up to my family. I won't lose Emily the same way." Victoria moved closer, her perfume cloying in the afternoon air. "And what about our child? Or have you forgotten that I'm carrying the Parker heir?" Richard met her gaze steadily. "Are you? Really? Or is that just another one of your manipulations?" The slap echoed in the wood-paneled room. Victoria's hand left a red mark on Richard's cheek, but he didn't flinch. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "Your precious Emily isn't worth destroying everything we've built." "No," Richard said quietly. "The mistake was letting you turn me into someone my daughter would be ashamed to call father." He walked to his desk and pressed the intercom. "Mrs. Hudson, please have the staff gather in the main hall. I have an announcement to make." Victoria's face went pale. "Richard, don't. It's done, Victoria. I'm acknowledging Emily as my daughter. I'm launching a full investigation into Sarah's illness, and I'm ending this facade of a marriage." As Victoria stormed out of the study, her threats hanging in the air behind her, Richard felt a strange sense of peace. He picked up Sarah's book of sonnets, reading the inscription she had written so long ago: "Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out even to the edge of doom." "I'm sorry it took me so long," he whispered to the empty room. "But I'm finally choosing love." Emily sat on the worn couch in her small apartment, staring at the unpaid medical bills scattered across the coffee table. Grace sat beside her, both still in their maid uniforms, the events of the morning hanging heavy in the air. From the bedroom, the sound of Sarah's labored breathing served as a painful reminder of everything at stake. "What am I going to do?" Emily whispered, picking up the latest hospital statement. The numbers seemed to blur before her eyes. Without this job, without the health insurance, her voice broke. Grace squeezed her hand. "Emily, think about what Mr. Parker said, the way he looked at you. There's something bigger going on here." The revelation that Richard Parker might be her father felt like a dream or a nightmare. Emily's mind kept replaying every interaction she'd had with him over the past 3 years. The way he'd always been kind to her, how his eyes would sometimes linger on her face with an unreadable expression. Her phone buzzed again, another message from James. He'd been texting since they left the mansion, offering support, asking to come over. But Emily couldn't face him yet, not when her entire world was shifting beneath her feet. "I need to check on Mum," Emily said, standing abruptly. But as she reached her mother's door, she heard Sarah talking on the phone, her voice uncharacteristically urgent. "Listen to me," Sarah was saying. "Victoria knows. She's always known. No, you don't understand. The medication. There's something wrong with it. I can feel it. Richard needs to know the truth about that night at the country club." Emily's hand froze on the doorknob. Before she could process what she'd heard, her mother's voice dissolved into a violent coughing fit. Emily rushed in to find Sarah doubled over, blood staining her handkerchief. "Mum," Emily cried out, rushing to her side. Grace appeared with water and Sarah's medication, but Sarah weakly pushed the pills away. "Don't," she gasped. "The pills. Victoria." Before she could finish, Sarah's eyes rolled back, and she collapsed into Emily's arms. The next few minutes were chaos, Grace calling 911, Emily holding her mother's limp hand, the sound of sirens growing closer. As the paramedics loaded Sarah into the ambulance, Emily's phone rang. An unknown number. With trembling fingers, she answered. "Miss Thompson," a male voice said smoothly. "This is Benjamin Blackwood, Victoria Parker's brother. I'm calling to inform you that if you pursue any claims regarding Richard Parker or attempt to investigate your mother's condition, there will be consequences. We have ways of making lives very difficult. Just ask James Montgomery about his father's accident." The call ended, leaving Emily standing in the street, watching the ambulance disappear around the corner. Grace appeared beside her, holding out a crumpled piece of paper she'd found in Sarah's room. It was an old photograph, the complete version of the one Victoria had found in Emily's pocket. But this one showed three people: Sarah, young and beautiful Richard, looking at her with undisguised love, and Victoria, standing slightly apart, her eyes fixed on Richard with an expression that sent chills down Emily's spine. "Emily," Grace said softly, "look at the date stamp." The photo was dated 2 days before Thomas Montgomery's fatal accident, the same night Sarah had disappeared from the country club forever. Emily's phone buzzed again, a text from James: "Need to talk. Found old files in my father's things, about the night he died. About your mother. Victoria's involved. Be careful." As if on cue, a black car pulled up to the curb. Dr. Anderson stepped out, his face grave. "Miss Thompson? I need to speak with you about your mother's condition, and about Victoria Parker." Standing there on the sidewalk of her modest apartment building, Emily felt the last pieces of her simple life crumbling away. She was no longer just Emily Thompson, the hard-working maid trying to support her sick mother. She was the center of a web of lies, secrets, and buried truths that stretched back 25 years. Grace touched her arm gently. "Whatever you decide to do, I'm with you." Emily squared her shoulders, feeling a strength she didn't know she possessed rising within her. "First, we make sure my mother's safe. Then we find out what really happened 25 years ago." She looked at the photograph again, at the three young people frozen in time, unaware of the tragedy about to unfold. It's time for the truth to come out. All of it. The locked room on the 3rd floor of the Parker mansion had always been a mystery, its existence like a silent guardian of forgotten secrets. On this stormy night, as thunder rattled the windows, Emily stood before it with James, her heart pounding. Mrs. Hudson had slipped her the key with trembling hands and whispered words that still echoed in her mind. "It was your mother's room. Everything is still there, exactly as she left it." The key turned with surprising ease, as if the lock had been recently maintained. The door creaked open to reveal a room frozen in time. A layer of dust covered everything, but beneath it lay a perfect preservation of 1995. A white sundress hung in the open closet, a pair of worn ballet flats tucked neatly beneath. Books lined the shelves: classics, poetry, and literature textbooks with Sarah Thompson's name written in careful script. "Look at this," James said softly, picking up a framed photograph from the bedside table. It showed a summer party at the country club, Sarah in that same white sundress, Richard in tennis whites, both laughing at something off camera. The joy in their faces was palpable, untouched by the tragedy that would soon unfold. Emily's hands trembled as she opened the drawer of the bedside table. Inside, she found a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. The top envelope, addressed to Richard but never sent, was dated the day before Sarah disappeared. "My dearest Richard," Emily read aloud, her voice catching. "By the time you read this, if you ever do, I'll be gone. I'm carrying your child, our child, and the joy of this miracle is matched only by my fear of what your family might do if they discover the truth." James moved closer, his presence steady and comforting as Emily continued reading. The letters told a story of secret meetings, of promises made under starlit skies, of dreams for a future that would never come to pass. But they also revealed something darker: threats made by William Parker, suspicious accidents befalling people who supported their relationship, and Victoria's increasingly obvious obsession with Richard. In the bottom of the drawer, wrapped in silk, they found a small diary. Its pages contained Sarah's detailed observations of the events leading up to her departure. One entry stood out, dated the night of Thomas Montgomery's accident. "Victoria came to me tonight with an ultimatum. She knows about the baby. Says William Parker will destroy my father's career. Will make sure I never teach again. But there's more. She hinted at something terrible planned for Richard if I don't leave. Mentioned Thomas Montgomery's loyalty becoming a problem. I'm scared. Not for myself, but for my baby, for Richard, for Thomas." James's face went pale as he read over Emily's shoulder. My father, he must have discovered their plan. Tried to warn your mother. A creaking floorboard made them both freeze. Emily quickly gathered the letters and diary, tucking them into her bag. Further exploration revealed more treasures of pressed flower from the country club gardens, ticket stubs from secret movie dates, and a small velvet box containing a simple engagement ring with a note for Sarah, when I find the courage to defy them all. But the most damning discovery lay at the bottom of an old hat box. A series of photographs, seemingly taken by someone following Richard and Sarah. On the back of each, Victoria's neat handwriting detailed dates, times, and locations. The final photo showed Thomas Montgomery's car intact, with a note insurance, if necessary. She was stalking them, James whispered, building a case, gathering ammunition. Emily's fingers brushed against something else in the hatbox, a medical record, her mother's original blood work from 25 years ago, showing no sign of the genetic condition that now threatened her life. Attached was a more recent lab report with troubling discrepancies. They'd been poisoning her, Emily realized, horror dawning. All these years, the medication. A sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut, making them both jump. In the distance, a clock struck midnight. They had been so absorbed in their discoveries that they hadn't noticed the time passing. We need to get these somewhere safe, James said urgently. Victoria has eyes everywhere. Just then, Emily's phone lit up with a text from Grace Victoria's on her way back to the mansion. Early labor pains. But something's not right, overheard her on the phone with Dr. Anderson. Something about maintaining the story. Emily looked at James, determination setting her features. We have proof now, of everything. The threats, the stalking, what they did to your father. She touched his arm gently. What they're still doing to my mother. James covered her hand with his own. Emily, this isn't just about a family scandal anymore. These people, they're dangerous. Look what they did to my father, to your mother. Which is exactly why we can't back down, Emily said firmly, gathering the evidence into her bag. For 25 years they've destroyed lives to protect their secrets. It has to stop. As they carefully relocked the room, Emily clutched the bag of discoveries close. In it lay not just proof of past crimes, but perhaps her mother's only hope for justice and proper treatment. The storm outside had grown stronger, but the real tempest was just beginning. The Parker Mansion's grand ballroom glittered with the light of 1,000 crystals as Boston's elite gathered for what Victoria had billed as a special announcement. The timing was deliberate, mere hours after Emily and James's discovery in the locked room, giving them no chance to act on what they'd found. Victoria stood at the top of the sweeping staircase, a vision in ice blue silk that emphasized her supposedly delicate condition. Richard stood beside her, his face an expressionless mask. Emily, no longer in her maid's uniform, but still not quite fitting in with the wealthy crowd, watched from a corner with Grace and James, all three having received pointed invitations that felt more like summons. My dear friends, Victoria began, her voice carrying across the hushed room. Richard and I have gathered you here to share the most wonderful news. She paused for effect, one hand resting dramatically on her stomach. After years of prayers and medical intervention, we are blessed to announce that a Parker heir is finally on the way. The room erupted in applause and congratulations. Emily watched as Dr. Anderson, standing near the front, nodded approvingly right on cue. But she also noticed how he wouldn't meet anyone's eyes, how his hands trembled slightly as he raised his champagne glass. Furthermore, Victoria continued, her gaze fixing deliberately on Emily. In light of this joyous news, Richard and I have decided to make some changes to the Parker family trust. Our child will, of course, be the sole heir to the Parker fortune. The implied message was clear. Any claims Emily might make would be overshadowed by Victoria's miracle pregnancy. Richard's jaw tightened visibly, but he remained silent. Benjamin Blackwood appeared at Emily's elbow, his voice low and threatening. I trust this makes your position clear, Miss Thompson. The Parker family has an heir, a legitimate one. But Emily wasn't watching Benjamin. Her attention was caught by Mrs. Hudson, who was quietly passing a note to James. As he read it, his face paled. "My father's old nurse," he whispered to Emily. "She's willing to talk. About the night of the accident, about Victoria's involvement. She's been afraid all these years, but seeing this charade," he gestured at Victoria's performance on the stairs. Victoria was now moving through the crowd, accepting congratulations and showing off the latest ultrasound photos that Dr. Anderson had conveniently provided. But Emily noticed something odd. The doctor kept checking his phone, growing increasingly agitated. Grace managed to position herself near enough to overhear his urgent whisper into his phone, "The blood work doesn't match. No, I can't just change the dates again. There are inconsistencies that could raise questions." Emily's own phone buzzed a message from the hospital where her mother was being treated. "Abnormal compounds found in patient's blood. Consistent with long-term poisoning. Police have been notified." The pieces were falling into place, but Victoria was still holding court, her voice rising over the murmur of conversations. "And of course we'll be converting that tragic little room on the 3rd floor into a nursery. It's time to clear out old ghosts, don't you think, Richard?" Richard finally spoke, his voice cutting through the artificial cheer. "That room belongs to Sarah Thompson. It stays exactly as it is." A hush fell over the crowd. Victoria's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered. "Darling, you're being sentimental. We need to think of our child's future now." "Our child?" Richard's question hung in the air like a challenge. Before Victoria could respond, Dr. Anderson's phone rang again. This time his face went completely white. He looked at Victoria, then at the ultrasound photos in guests' hands, and suddenly bolted for the door. Victoria's composure cracked. "Michael, where are you going?" "We're not finished here." But the doctor was already gone. In the confusion, James slipped Emily another note, this one from his father's nurse VP. Orchestrated everything. "The accident, Sarah's departure, the fake medical records. Have proof. Will testify." The elaborate announcement was unraveling. Victoria's hand pressed against her stomach, but Emily noticed something when she thought no one was watching. That protective maternal gesture looked more like she was checking if her padding was still in place. Mrs. Parker Grace's clear voice rang out. "Would you mind explaining why Dr. Anderson just received lab results showing hormonal levels inconsistent with your claimed pregnancy timeline?" The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's face contorted with fury as she realized her carefully constructed plan was falling apart. "Richard," she hissed, grabbing his arm. "Do something." But Richard was looking at Emily, really looking at her, perhaps for the first time seeing Sarah in her face, recognizing the strength that had drawn him to her mother all those years ago. "Yes," he said quietly. "I believe it's time I did something." He turned to address the shocked crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have an announcement of my own to make. About my daughter, my real daughter, and about the truth that's been buried for 25 years. Victoria's scream of rage echoed through the ballroom as her perfect world began to crumble around her. The morning headlines hit like a tidal wave across Boston's social landscape. Parker family scandal heir or imposter screamed the Boston Globe. Fake pregnancy and hidden daughter rock elite family declared the Herald. Television news vans lined the street outside the Parker mansion, their satellite dishes reaching toward the grey morning sky like accusing fingers. Richard Parker sat in his study, watching the media frenzy through bulletproof windows installed years ago to keep the world out. Now they seemed to be keeping secrets in. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since the disastrous announcement party. Board members, business partners, social acquaintances, all demanding explanations. "The stock is down 12%, his financial advisor reported grimly. "Investors are nervous about the stability of Parker Enterprises. The board is calling for an emergency meeting. Outside his study, he could hear Victoria giving her own press conference in the garden. Her voice, practiced and trembling with calculated emotion, carried through the walls, "I am the victim of a cruel conspiracy. This girl claiming to be Richard's daughter is nothing but a manipulative gold digger. As for my pregnancy, the stress of these false accusations has put my baby at risk." Emily watched the coverage from her mother's hospital room, where Sarah was finally receiving proper treatment for years of systematic poisoning. Grace had smuggled in a laptop, and they watched together as Victoria masterfully played the role of wronged wife. Parker Family Foundation donations under investigation scrolled across the bottom of the screen. The reporter detailed suspicious patterns in the foundation's charitable giving, particularly to medical research facilities overseen by Dr. Anderson. The hospital corridor outside was equally chaotic. Reporters had discovered Sarah's location, and security guards stood posted at her door. Through the window, Emily could see photographers with telephoto lenses positioned in buildings across the street. William Parker, still formidable despite his age and wheelchair, issued his own statement from the family's city apartment. "The Parker name has stood for integrity in Boston for 6 generations. These baseless accusations are an attack not just on our family, but on the very fabric of our society's values." But the carefully constructed facade was cracking. Former employees began coming forward, encouraged by Mrs. Hudson's example. Stories of Victoria's manipulation, of mysterious accidents befalling those who crossed the family, of documents altered and evidence buried, it all poured out like a poisoned tide. James Montgomery faced his own media spotlight. Reporters had dug up the details of his father's accident, drawing connections between Thomas Montgomery's death and Sarah Thompson's disappearance. Outside his groundskeeper's cottage, journalists shouted questions. Did your father die? Trying to expose the Parker family's secrets. Was Victoria Parker involved in his death? Benjamin Blackwood attempted damage control, calling in favors from every media contact in his considerable network. But even his influence couldn't stop the leaked photos from the third-floor room showing Victoria's years of stalking and surveillance. When confronted outside his law office, his only comment was a terse no comment before diving into his waiting car. The social fallout was immediate and brutal. Invitations were rescinded. Board positions were regretfully reconsidered. The Parker name, once a golden key to Boston's most exclusive circles, became toxic overnight. Dr. Anderson, cracking under the pressure, checked himself into a private clinic, citing exhaustion. But not before his office suffered a mysterious fire that destroyed many of his patient records, though copies of Sarah's original medical files had already been safely delivered to the district attorney's office. Richard watched it all unravel with a strange sense of relief mixed with regret. Decades of lies were being exposed, and while the cost to the family's reputation was enormous, the weight lifting from his shoulders felt like redemption. "Your father's on line 1," his secretary announced, "and the board members are waiting in the conference room." "Tell them all I'm busy," Richard replied, standing up. "I'm going to the hospital to see my daughter and Sarah." As he left his study, he passed Victoria filming yet another interview in the living room. "I just want what's best for the Parker legacy," she was saying tearfully into the camera. "For my unborn child." Richard paused in the doorway. "The truth is what's best for the Parker legacy, Victoria. Something we forgot a long time ago." The cameras swung toward him, but he was already walking away. Let them film, let them speculate. The real story of love lost and found, of courage and redemption, was waiting for him at the hospital. Outside, protesters had gathered at the mansion gates, carrying signs demanding justice for Thomas Montgomery and Sarah Thompson. The Parker name was splashed across every newspaper, every news channel, every social media feed. But for the first time in his life, Richard didn't care about protecting the family reputation. He cared about protecting his real family, Emily and Sarah, even if it meant watching his carefully constructed world burn down around him. Emily stood in her mother's hospital room as the sun set over Boston, casting long shadows across the city that had become a battlefield of family secrets and lies. Sarah was sleeping peacefully for the first time in years, the proper treatment finally counteracting years of Victoria's poisoning. On the small TV in the corner, muted news coverage continued to dissect the Parker family scandal. But James entered quietly, carrying a cup of coffee and wearing the worried expression that hadn't left his face since the truth about his father's death began to emerge. The media's still camped outside. They're calling it Boston's Dynasty War now. Emily took the coffee but didn't drink it. Instead, she watched the steam rise and dissipate, much like her simple life had vanished in the past few days. "I can't stay here, James. Not right now. Not in the middle of all this." "What do you mean?" He moved closer, concern deepening in his eyes. "Look at what this fight is doing to everyone." Emily gestured to her sleeping mother, to the news coverage, to the guards outside the door. "Victoria's desperate. Benjamin's dangerous. The more we push, the more vicious they become." Grace chose that moment to arrive, clutching a stack of newspapers. "They're attacking your character now, Emily. Victoria's given interviews suggesting you seduced Richard, that this is all a ploy to steal the Parker fortune." Emily laughed bitterly. "The fortune? I just wanted to take care of my mother, to understand where I came from. I never asked for any of this." The weight of the past few days pressed down on her, the revelation of her father's identity, the discovery of Victoria's decades of manipulation, the truth about James's father's death, and the media circus that had engulfed them all. Every move she made was scrutinized, every word twisted into headlines. "I need time," Emily said finally, looking between James and Grace. "Time to think, to figure out who I am away from all this. Mum's getting better, the truth about Victoria is coming out, and Richard." She paused, thinking of her father's torn expression whenever he visited. "Richard has his own battles to fight." "Where will you go?" James asked, his voice tight with emotion. Emily touched the worn copy of Jane Eyre on her mother's bedside table, her mother's favorite book, about a young woman finding her own path. "There's a writer's retreat in Vermont. Mum always talked about going there someday. It's quiet, isolated, a place to think." Grace started to protest, but Emily held up her hand. "I'm not running away. I'm not giving up. But I need to understand who Emily Thompson is before I can be Emily Parker. And I can't do that in the middle of this storm." James paced the small room, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "Victoria will see this as a victory. She'll use your absence to spin more lies." "Let her try," Emily said with quiet determination. "We have the truth now about the poisoning, about your father's accident, about her fake pregnancy. Richard has all the evidence. The investigation will continue whether I'm here or not." Sarah stirred in her sleep, murmuring something unintelligible. Emily gently adjusted her blanket, remembering all the times her mother had done the same for her. "Mom taught me that strength sometimes means stepping back, gathering yourself, and coming back stronger." "How long?" Grace asked softly. "A few months. Until the media frenzy dies down. Until I can face all this with a clear head." Emily finally took a sip of the now cold coffee. "Until I know that when I fight back it's for the right reasons, not just revenge." James moved to the window, staring out at the gathering darkness. "I could come with you." Emily's heart ached his offer, but she shook her head. "You need to stay. Help Richard uncover the rest of Victoria's schemes. Keep an eye on Benjamin, he's still dangerous." And she touched his arm gently. "Finish uncovering the truth about your father. He deserves justice." Grace hugged Emily fiercely. "Promise you'll stay in touch. Promise you won't disappear like your mother had to." "I promise," Emily whispered. "This isn't like before. I'm not being forced away. I'm choosing to step back, to find my own strength." She looked around the hospital room at her healing mother, at her loyal friends, at the city lights beyond the window. The Parker name might open doors, but it also cast long shadows, Before she could step into that light or fight those shadows, she needed to know who she was beyond both. "I'll leave tomorrow morning," she decided, "before the media arrives." "Grace, will you?" "I'll take care of your mum," Grace assured her. "James and I both will. And Richard, he'll understand. He let your mother go once to protect her. He'll let you go now to find yourself." As night settled over Boston, Emily began to pack her small bag. Not running away, she reminded herself, just taking a step back to move forward. The truth was out now. Justice was in motion, and for the first time in her life she had the luxury of time to understand her own story. The writer's retreat in Vermont was housed in a converted Victorian farmhouse, its white clapboard exterior and wraparound porch a world away from the Parker mansion's imposing grandeur. Emily arrived as autumn was painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, her few possessions packed in a single suitcase, her mother's copy of Jane Eyre tucked safely inside. Rebecca Walsh, the retreat's elderly director, showed Emily to a small room in the East Wing, its window overlooking an apple orchard. "We all come here carrying stories," she said kindly, noting Emily's haunted expression. "Some to write them, some to understand them, some to heal from them." The room was simple: a narrow bed, a desk beneath the window, a wooden chair, and a small dresser. No crystal chandeliers, no antique furniture, no weight of generations judging her every move. Emily sat at the desk, and for the first time in weeks, took a deep breath that didn't feel like it might shatter her. Days fell into a gentle rhythm. Mornings began with coffee on the porch, watching mist rise from the valley below. Emily joined the other residents, a mix of writers, artists and souls, seeking quiet for communal breakfasts where conversation flowed freely but questions about pasts remained politely unasked. She began keeping a journal, filling pages with memories and questions. What parts of herself came from Sarah, with her love of literature and quiet strength? What parts were Richard's, the determination, the sense of justice? And what parts were uniquely her own, shaped by years of standing in the shadows, observing the intricate dance of power and privilege? Grace sent regular updates about her mother's recovery, about the ongoing investigation into Victoria's crimes, about James's quest for justice for his father. Emily read them carefully but didn't respond immediately, letting the distance give her perspective on the tangled web she'd left behind. In the retreat's extensive library, Emily found herself drawn to books about identity and inheritance. She read about psychological inheritance, how patterns of behavior, both good and bad, passed through generations. The Parker legacy of secrets and power plays suddenly seemed less like destiny and more like a choice she could reject. Rebecca became a mentor of sorts, recognizing in Emily a kindred spirit. During their evening walks through the orchard, she shared her own story of walking away from wealth and expectations to find her authentic self. "The hardest part," she told Emily, "isn't leaving. It's figuring out what to keep and what to let go of when you return." Emily took up photography, capturing the changing seasons with an old camera she found in the retreat's art room. Through the lens, she learned to see beauty in small moments: morning frost on fallen leaves, late afternoon sun through bare branches, the way shadows played across weathered barn wood. It was so different from the manufactured perfection of the Parker world. She volunteered at the local library, helping with children's reading programs. The simple joy of sharing stories with eager young minds reminded her of her mother's teaching days, before Victoria's poison had stolen that passion from her. In those moments, Emily felt closer to understanding Sarah's choices, her sacrifices. Letters arrived from Richard, tentative at first, then increasingly open as he shared his own journey of reconciliation with the past. He wrote about dismantling the toxic structures within Parker Enterprises, about learning to value truth over appearance. His words were those of a father trying to bridge decades of absence, not a wealthy man trying to buy forgiveness. One morning, Emily found a package waiting for her, a journal her mother had kept during her pregnancy, preserved all these years in the third-floor room. Reading Sarah's words about hope and fear, about dreams for her unborn child's future, Emily finally began to see herself not as a secret to be hidden or a weapon to be used, but as a beloved daughter who had been protected at great cost. As weeks turned into months, Emily felt herself changing. The anger and confusion that had driven her from Boston gradually transformed into something calmer, more centered. She learned to separate her worth from the Parker name, to value herself not for whose daughter she was, but for who she chose to be. She started writing her own story, not for publication but for understanding. The words flowed easily now, free from the weight of others' expectations. She wrote about being invisible in the mansion, about finding her voice, about learning that true strength often came wrapped in gentleness. The other residents became a kind of family, sharing meals, critiquing each other's work, offering support without demands. Among them, Emily wasn't the Parker Harris or the maid who dared to claim a fortune. She was simply Emily, a young woman with a story to tell and the courage to tell it. Winter settled over the mountains, wrapping the retreat in blankets of snow and silence. Emily stood at her window one evening, watching darkness gather in the valley, and realized she felt ready. Not to reclaim the Parker name or to fight Victoria's schemes, but to be herself Emily Thompson, daughter of Sarah and Richard, shaped by both love and loss, finally strong enough to stand in her own light. Back in Boston, Sarah Thompson's hospital room became a battlefield of a different kind. Despite the doctor's best efforts to counteract years of systematic poisoning, her body struggled to recover. The damage done by Victoria's carefully orchestrated medication scheme ran deeper than anyone had initially suspected. Grace spent her nights in the uncomfortable hospital chair, watching the monitors that tracked Sarah's vital signs. During one particularly difficult evening, Sarah's fever spiked dangerously high, and in her delirium, she began speaking about the past. "Thomas," she whispered, clutching Grace's hand. "He tried to warn me. The break lines." Victoria knew. She knew everything. Her words were fragmented, but each one added another piece to the dark puzzle of the past. Dr. Catherine Martinez, the new specialist brought in after Dr. Anderson's disappearance, pored over decades of medical records with growing concern. These prescriptions, she explained to Richard during a private consultation. They were designed to cause gradual organ failure while mimicking a genetic condition. Someone with extensive medical knowledge had to be involved. Richard's face aged years in moments. And the timeline. The poisoning began exactly when Sarah started working at the Parker mansion. Dr. Martinez's voice was gentle but firm. "Mr. Parker, this wasn't just about silencing her. This was slow, calculated murder." The investigation uncovered a network of pharmacies, all with connections to the Blackwood family. Each had played a part in dispensing the tainted medications, creating a paper trail that looked legitimate on the surface, but revealed its sinister nature under scrutiny. Mrs. Hudson, who had watched Sarah's decline over the years, finally broke her silence. She provided investigators with a detailed diary documenting Victoria's late-night meetings with Dr. Anderson, the mysterious deliveries, and Sarah's gradually worsening symptoms. "I should have spoken up sooner," she confessed to Grace, her usual composure cracking. "But Victoria made it clear: my pension, my daughter's university scholarship, everything depended on my silence." One night, during a rare moment of clarity, Sarah asked for her old writing journal. As Grace helped her turn the pages, Sarah pointed to entries that had seemed insignificant at the time, but now read like warnings. Notes about feeling unusually tired after Victoria's thoughtful delivery of herbal tea, mentions of dizziness following meetings with Dr. Anderson. "I knew something was wrong," Sarah whispered, her voice weak but determined. "But they had me trapped. If I stopped taking the medications, they threatened to hurt Emily. If I tried to leave Boston, they would make sure I never taught again." The truth about Thomas Montgomery's death emerged through Sarah's fevered recollections. He had discovered Victoria's plans, had tried to help Sarah escape. The night of his accident, he had left a message on Sarah's answering machine. But before she could hear it, Victoria's brother had arranged for the machine to disappear in a convenient break-in. Richard spent hours by Sarah's bedside, holding her hand, trying to make up for 25 years of absence in moments stolen between her periods of consciousness. "I should have protected you," he would whisper when he thought she was sleeping. "Both of you." The hospital's security team intercepted multiple attempts by Victoria's associates to gain access to Sarah's room. Flowers arrived with cards expressing sympathy, but lab tests revealed trace amounts of toxins in the water. Each attempt was documented, building an ever stronger case against Victoria. Sarah's condition fluctuated daily. Some mornings she would seem stronger, able to sit up and talk about Emily's letters from Vermont. Other days, the poison's legacy would reassert itself, leaving her struggling for breath, her body fighting battles on multiple fronts. Dr. Martinez worked tirelessly, consulting with specialists worldwide, searching for treatments to undo years of calculated damage. "The human body has remarkable resilience," she assured Grace. "But we're in uncharted territory. The combination of compounds used, it's like nothing we've seen before." One stormy night, Sarah's heart stopped. For 3 terrifying minutes, the medical team fought to bring her back. When they succeeded, she woke with a strange clarity. She asked for paper and pen, and with trembling hands wrote down everything she remembered about the night Thomas died, details she had suppressed for years out of fear and guilt. "Emily needs to know," she insisted, pressing the pages into Grace's hands, "not just for James, but for herself. To understand why I stayed silent for so long, why I let them poison me rather than risk losing her." The document revealed a conspiracy more intricate than anyone had imagined. Victoria hadn't just orchestrated Thomas's death, she had systematically eliminated anyone who might have helped Sarah and Richard stay together. The poison wasn't just in the medication, it had seeped into every aspect of Sarah's life, isolating her, making her dependent on the very people who were slowly killing her. As winter deepened outside the hospital windows, Sarah's struggle became symbolic of the larger battle between truth and power, love and corruption. Each day she survived was a victory not just for her, but for every person the Parker-Blackwood alliance had silenced over the years. Richard Parker stood before the Parker Enterprises board of directors, his father William glowering from his wheelchair at the head of the table. The quarterly financial report projected on the screen behind him showed numbers in alarming red, but this meeting wasn't really about profits and losses. The Parker name stands for something. William's voice cut through the tension. "For 6 generations we've maintained our position through discipline, through understanding what must be done to protect our interests. Your weakness threatens everything we've built." Richard straightened his tie, a gesture that had become armor over the years. "Our position? Let's talk about how we've maintained that, Father. Shall we discuss Thomas Montgomery's accident? Or perhaps Sarah Thompson's mysteriously declining health?" The board members shifted uncomfortably. Most of them had been carefully chosen by William over the years, each one bound to the Parker family through a complex web of favors and threats. But now, with federal investigators asking questions and reporters digging into decades of suspicious accidents, those bonds were beginning to fray. "You're being dramatic," William dismissed. "Business sometimes requires difficult decisions. You understood that once." No, Richard's voice was quiet but firm. "I didn't understand. I obeyed. There's a difference. And that ends now." He distributed folders to each board member, watching their faces as they read the contents. Evidence of financial manipulation, of charitable donations used to buy silence, of corporate funds funneled into private accounts used to pay off potential whistleblowers. "This company needs restructuring," Richard continued. "Complete transparency, new leadership, and you, Father, need to step down. Permanently." William's laugh was cold. "You think these people will support you? They know which Parker built this empire. Which Parker ensures their comfortable positions." But Richard saw the fear behind his father's bravado. The careful construction of power and influence that had seemed unshakable was crumbling. The board members wouldn't meet William's eyes. "I've already spoken to the SEC," Richard announced, "voluntarily disclosed everything. We can weather the fines, survive the scandal, but only with complete cooperation and reform." The boardroom erupted in chaos. William slammed his hand on the table, demanding loyalty, threatening consequences, but Richard remained standing, calm in the storm he had unleashed. Later that evening, in his father's study, the confrontation continued more personally. Eleanor, Richard's mother, sat rigid in her chair, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the armrests. "You're destroying your family," she accused. "Everything we sacrificed to give you a proper position in society." Sacrificed? Richard's laugh was bitter. "Like you sacrificed Sarah. Like you sacrificed my daughter's chance to know her father. Tell me, Mother, did you know what Victoria was doing to Sarah all these years?" Eleanor's silence was answer enough. Richard felt the last threads of illusion about his childhood snap. "The company will survive," he said firmly, "but it will be clean. Legitimate. No more accidents, no more buying silence, no more destroying lives to protect our precious position." William wheeled his chair closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You think Victoria will go quietly? That the Blackwoods will simply accept defeat? They know every skeleton in our closet, Richard. Every decision, every cover-up." "Let them talk," Richard replied. "I'm done living in fear of the truth." The next weeks were a blur of legal meetings, press conferences, and corporate restructuring. Richard replaced key board members, instituted new oversight committees, and ordered full audits of every department. Each move was met with resistance from the old guard, but he pressed on. The family foundation underwent the most dramatic transformation. Richard redirected its resources toward actual charitable works, starting with a medical research grant specifically focused on treating victims of long-term poisoning. The irony was lost on no one. The society pages buzzed with stories of the Parker Empire's transformation. Old allies distanced themselves, unwilling to be caught in the fallout, but new partnerships emerged, attracted by Richard's commitment to transparency and reform. Through it all, Richard kept Sarah's photograph on his desk, not the surveillance photo Victoria had taken, but the original from their summer of love. It reminded him daily of why he was fighting, what had been lost, and what could still be saved. One morning, he arrived at his office to find his father waiting, looking older and more vulnerable than Richard had ever seen him. "You look like I did," William said quietly, "the day I decided the Parker name was worth any price. I thought I was protecting our legacy. Instead, I poisoned it more thoroughly than Victoria ever poisoned Sarah." It was as close to an apology as William Parker would ever come. Richard simply nodded and got to work. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was still unwritten. Victoria Parker sat in her brother Benjamin's penthouse office, watching night fall over Boston through bulletproof glass. Her carefully constructed facade was cracking, the fake pregnancy revealed, her influence at the mansion diminished, her carefully laid plans unraveling thread by thread. "They think they've won," she said, swirling expensive scotch in a crystal glass. Richard with his transparency crusade, Emily hiding in Vermont, Sarah somehow surviving despite everything we've done. They think it's over. Benjamin Blackwood studied his sister carefully. Even now, facing ruin, she maintained her perfect posture, her calculated elegance. "What are you planning, Victoria?" A cold smile played across her lips. Emily's been so careful, hasn't she? Keeping her distance, staying away from the scandal. But what if tragedy struck? What if her poor, sick mother had a sudden relapse while her devoted daughter was too far away to say goodbye? "The hospital's security is tight," Benjamin cautioned. After the flowers incident, "We don't need access to Sarah," Victoria interrupted. "We just need Emily to think we do. A few well-placed threats, some close calls, maybe an unfortunate accident involving one of her precious mother's doctors." She stood, moving to the window. Below, traffic flowed through the city streets, oblivious to the schemes being hatched above. "Emily will come running back to Boston, and when she does..." Benjamin understood. She'll be vulnerable, exposed. Victoria's plan unfolded with the precision of a spider weaving its web. First came the anonymous notes to Emily's retreat, photographs of Sarah's hospital room taken from nearby buildings, suggestions of access to her medical care, hints of remaining poison in her system. Then the incidents began. Dr. Martinez's car brakes failed on her way to the hospital. She survived, but the message was clear. Grace found her apartment broken into, nothing taken but Sarah's medical files clearly rifled through. James discovered his father's grave desecrated, old evidence that might have proven Victoria's involvement destroyed. "Your daughter's very brave," Victoria left a message on Richard's voicemail, her voice dripping with malice. "Staying away, thinking distance will protect her. Tell me, Richard, how did that work out for Sarah all those years ago?" The psychological warfare escalated. Victoria orchestrated a series of near misses at the hospital, unauthorized personnel almost making it to Sarah's room, suspicious figures spotted in the parking garage, equipment mysteriously malfunctioning. Each incident was carefully designed to look random while sending a clear message: no one was safe. Victoria made sure Emily received news of every close call, every threat, every moment of danger to those she loved. "She's trying to draw Emily out," Grace realized, watching Sarah's room one night. "Make her feel responsible, force her to come back before she's ready." But Victoria's desperation made her careless. Her schemes, once subtle and untraceable, became bolder, more reckless. She left evidence, security camera footage, witnesses who couldn't be silenced, paper trails that couldn't be erased. The final straw came when Victoria attempted to bribe a new nurse on Sarah's floor. But the nurse was an undercover federal agent, part of the ongoing investigation into the Blackwood Parker conspiracy. "Mrs. Parker," the agent said, "recording everything. Are you offering me money to tamper with Sarah Thompson's medication?" Victoria's mask slipped. "I'm offering you a chance to be part of something bigger than yourself. The Parkers, the Blackwoods, we remember, our friends and our enemies." The threat was explicit, recorded, and damning. But even as federal agents closed in, Victoria had one last card to play. She called Emily directly, her voice calm and controlled. "Your mother's strong, I'll give her that. 25 years of my special cocktail and she's still breathing. But everyone has a breaking point. Come home, Emily. Face me. Or see how many more people you love can survive accidents." The call was traced, documented, added to the mounting evidence. But Victoria didn't care anymore. Her world was burning, and she intended to take everyone down with her. "You've lost," Victoria Richard told her during their last confrontation. "It's over." Her laugh was chilling. "Over? Oh, Richard, it's never over. Ask Thomas Montgomery. Ask your precious Sarah. There are always consequences for defying me." As federal investigations closed in and her allies deserted her, Victoria Parker prepared for her final act of revenge. She had nothing left to lose, which made her more dangerous than ever. The hospital corridor echoed with the urgent footsteps of Dr. Martinez as she rushed toward Sarah Thompson's room. The monitors had begun their frantic beeping at 3:47 a.m., signaling a catastrophic drop in vital signs. Grace, dozing in her usual chair, jolted awake to find Sarah gasping for breath, her skin taking on a bluish tinge. Multiple organ failure, Dr. Martinez explained to Richard, who had arrived still wearing his dinner suit from a late business meeting. The years of poisoning have created a cascade effect, her body shutting down. The specialist team gathered around Sarah's bed, their faces grim as they reviewed her latest test results. Years of Victoria's carefully crafted toxins had created damage that defied conventional treatment protocols. Each organ system was compromised, each attempted remedy complicated by the presence of unknown compounds in her bloodstream. "There's a treatment," Dr. Martinez said finally, running her hand through her disheveled hair. "An experimental protocol at a private clinic in Switzerland. They specialize in cases of long-term poisoning, particularly with unknown compounds. But the cost," Richard finished, understanding immediately. "How much?" The number Dr. Martinez quoted made even Richard Parker blink. The treatment itself was astronomical, but the associated costs, the specialized transport, the round-clock care, the follow-up procedures pushed it beyond even what most wealthy individuals could casually afford. "Insurance won't cover experimental treatments," Grace said quietly, "and with the federal investigation freezing Parker assets." Richard paced the room, his mind racing. The company's restructuring had tied up much of his liquid wealth. The family foundation's funds were under scrutiny. Even his personal accounts were being monitored for any suspicious transfers that Victoria's allies might try to exploit. Sarah stirred on the bed, her eyes fluttering open. "Emily," she whispered, Don't tell Emily. She'll come back. Victoria's waiting." The monitor's beeping increased as Sarah's blood pressure dropped again. The medical team rushed in, administering emergency medications, fighting to stabilize her deteriorating condition. "We need to make a decision quickly," Dr. Martinez urged. "Every hour reduces her chances of recovery." Grace was already on the phone with the Vermont retreat, but Emily wasn't answering. The refuge's policy of limited outside contact, usually a blessing for souls seeking peace, had become a barrier in their moment of crisis. James arrived, still in his gardening clothes, carrying a stack of papers. "I've been researching the clinic," he said, spreading documents across the small hospital table. "They have an impressive success rate with similar cases, but they require full payment before beginning treatment." Richard made calls to his financial advisors, exploring every possible avenue. But the federal investigation into Parker Enterprises had created a web of restrictions and monitoring that made quick access to large sums nearly impossible. "Sell the mansion," Grace suggested suddenly. "The art collection alone could cover the treatment." But Richard shook his head. "Victoria's lawyers have tied up the property in the divorce proceedings. We can't sell anything without court approval, which would take weeks." The irony was brutal. The Parker wealth, built over generations and maintained through Victoria's ruthless schemes, was now trapped in legal limbo when it was needed most. Sarah's condition continued to deteriorate. The doctors installed more monitors, added more medications, but the underlying damage remained untreatable without the specialized care only the Swiss clinic could provide. "There might be another way," James said quietly, pulling Richard aside. "My father. Before the accident, he set up a trust fund for me. It's not enough for the full treatment, but it's a start." Grace wiped tears from her eyes. "I have savings, and my mother's house could be mortgaged." But Richard stopped them both. "No! Your father died because of this family's secrets, James, and Grace, you've already given so much. There has to be another way." As if in response to his words, Sarah's monitors began their frantic beeping again. Dr. Martinez rushed in, barking orders to her team. "We're losing her. Code blue." The next few minutes were chaos, nurses running, machines whirring, the terrible sound of a flat line cutting through it all. Richard stood helpless, watching the medical team fight to bring Sarah back from the brink once again. When they succeeded, Dr. Martinez's face was grave. "That's twice now. Her heart won't survive many more episodes like this, without the specialized treatment. I honestly don't know how much time she has left." Grace slipped away to try Emily's phone again, while James returned to his research, looking for alternative treatments, other clinics, any option they might have missed. Richard remained by Sarah's bed, holding her frail hand, feeling the weight of 25 years of absence. "I failed you once," he whispered to her unconscious form. I won't fail you again. I promise. The federal investigation into the Parker-Blackwood conspiracy reached a turning point on a rainy Tuesday morning when Dr. Anderson was found in a small motel just outside Montreal. The once respected physician, now haggard and haunted, had fled there after Victoria's schemes began to collapse. I'll tell you everything he said to the federal agents, his hands shaking as he poured himself another drink. About the medications, about Victoria's plans, about all of it. I can't live with it anymore. His confession, recorded over 12 hours, revealed the intricate web of Victoria's manipulations. He provided detailed records of the poison cocktail he'd developed under her direction, designed to mimic genetic illness while slowly destroying Sarah's organs. Each prescription had been carefully crafted to create dependence, ensuring Sarah couldn't simply stop taking the medications without risking her life. Meanwhile, at the Parker mansion, Mrs. Hudson led investigators to a hidden safe behind the library paneling. Inside, they found Victoria's red notebook, her personal record of 2 decades of schemes and blackmail. The pages revealed not just her plot against Sarah, but dozens of other lives she'd destroyed to maintain her position. She kept evidence of everything Mrs. Hudson explained, her voice trembling. Said it was her insurance policy. Every time someone threatened her control, she'd remind them of what she knew about them. Victoria's fake pregnancy scheme unraveled next. A nurse at the fertility clinic broke down under questioning, admitting to falsifying medical records in exchange for Victoria's help with her gambling debts. The ultrasound photos that had convinced Boston Society of Victoria's miracle baby were revealed to be purchased from a desperate young mother in need of money. Benjamin Blackwood's carefully maintained facade cracked under the pressure. During a late-night raid of his office, investigators discovered a hidden room filled with surveillance files. Victoria had been monitoring everyone, family members, business associates, even her own allies. The files on Sarah were particularly extensive, documenting every doctor's visit, every prescription, every sign that the poison was working as intended. She was obsessed, Benjamin admitted during his interrogation. It wasn't just about keeping Richard or protecting the family name anymore. She enjoyed the power, the control. Watching Sarah slowly deteriorate while playing the concerned employer, it was like a game to her. The investigation revealed that Victoria's schemes extended far beyond Sarah. Thomas Montgomery's accident was just one of many she had orchestrated. The brake lines of his car had indeed been tampered with, but the true target had been the evidence he was planning to expose about Victoria's other victims. Hotel security footage surfaced showing Victoria meeting with Dr. Anderson the night before Sarah's most recent crisis. The doctor had been reluctant to continue their arrangement, but Victoria's threats were explicit: your daughter's scholarship, your wife's position at the hospital, your practice, I own all of it. Remember that? Grace discovered a series of emails between Victoria and various hospital staff members, revealing how she had manipulated Sarah's care even after her schemes were exposed. Small doses of poison had still been finding their way into Sarah's system through supposedly secure channels. She had people everywhere, Grace realized, scrolling through the evidence. Nurses, orderlies, even the cafeteria staff. Everyone had something to lose, someone to protect. Victoria's own staff began turning against her. Her personal assistant provided investigators with recorded conversations, including one where Victoria explicitly ordered the sabotage of Dr. Martinez's car. Make it look like an accident, she had said, like all the others. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Timothy, Victoria's beloved Maltese, had died suddenly 3 weeks earlier. A routine autopsy, performed because of his value as a show dog, revealed traces of the same poison that had been used on Sarah. Victoria had apparently tested her toxic concoctions on her own pet, fine-tuning the formula before using it on human victims. As each new revelation emerged, Victoria's carefully constructed world continued to crumble. Society friends stopped taking her calls. Bank accounts were frozen. Former allies rushed to make deals with prosecutors, each revelation leading to more evidence of her crimes. But even as her schemes were exposed, Victoria remained dangerous. Her knowledge of Parker family secrets, accumulated over decades, made her a threat until the very end. She had hidden copies of her most damaging evidence in multiple locations, insurance against anyone who might try to stop her. "She's not finished," Richard warned the investigators. Victoria doesn't lose. She destroys everything around her first. The truth of his words would soon become apparent as Victoria prepared to unleash her final, most devastating plan, one that would target not just Sarah or Emily, but everyone who had dared to defy her. William Parker's private study in the family's city apartment became ground zero for the exposure of decades of Parker family secrets. Federal agents spent 3 days cataloging the contents of his hidden vault, each document revealing a darker chapter in the dynasty's history than the last. "The corruption goes back 3 generations," the lead investigator explained to Richard. "Your grandfather's real estate empire wasn't built on smart investments, it was built on blackmail, fraud, and forced acquisitions. People who refused to sell would suffer convenient accidents." The oldest documents revealed a pattern of systematic intimidation. Competing businesses mysteriously burned down. Rival executives found themselves facing manufactured scandals. Children of resistant property owners would suddenly lose their college scholarships or job opportunities. Eleanor Parker's personal diaries proved particularly revealing. Her careful social observations had documented every scandal, every covered-up crime, every skeleton in Boston's most prominent closets. These weren't just casual notes, they were ammunition, carefully preserved to maintain the Parker family's power. "Your mother was the real architect of our social position," William admitted to Richard during a private moment. Victoria learned everything from her, the art of destroying lives while maintaining plausible deniability, the careful cultivation of debts and favors, the way to make threats sound like concerned advice. The investigation uncovered a network of corrupt officials spanning decades. Judges who had buried evidence, police chiefs who had steered investigations away from Parker interests, medical examiners who had classified suspicious deaths as accidents or natural causes. Richard discovered that his own rise in the business world hadn't been as self-made as he'd believed. His father had systematically destroyed his early competitors, using methods that made Victoria's schemes seem amateur by comparison. Each of Richard's major business successes had been secretly orchestrated, built on a foundation of threats and corruption. "Did you ever win anything fairly?" Richard demanded of his father. "Was there ever a deal that didn't involve destroying someone?" William's response was chilling in its simplicity. "Winning fairly is for people who can't afford to lose." The family's charitable foundation, long celebrated for its philanthropy, was revealed to be a sophisticated money laundering operation. Donations were used to buy influence, fund illegal operations, and maintain the web of corruption that protected the Parker interests. James discovered that his father's death was part of a larger pattern. Thomas Montgomery hadn't been the first person to die trying to expose Parker family crimes. A journalist in 1985, a reform-minded politician in 1992, a federal investigator in 1998, all had met with convenient accidents after getting too close to the truth. The most shocking revelations concerned the family's treatment of its own members. Cousins who threatened to break ranks had been institutionalized. Rebellious children had been sent to brutal reform schools. Even Richard's older brother, whose existence had been hidden from him, had disappeared into a private asylum after threatening to expose family secrets. Grace found evidence that her own family's immigration struggles had been deliberately engineered by the Parkers to ensure her loyalty. Her parents' work visas, her scholarship, her brother's medical care, all had been manipulated to create dependency. Mrs. Hudson's discovery of an old security system revealed that every room in the Parker mansion had been bugged for decades. The family had accumulated recordings of countless private conversations, using them to maintain control over staff, business associates, and even their own relatives. The investigation revealed that Sarah hadn't been Victoria's first victim. 3 other women who had caught Richard's attention over the years had been systematically driven away through similar schemes of intimidation and manipulation. Eleanor's private correspondence exposed her role in selecting Victoria as Richard's wife. The Blackwood family had been chosen not for their social status, but for their expertise in handling the dynasty's darker operations. Victoria's ruthlessness hadn't been a flaw, it had been her primary qualification. As each new secret came to light, Boston society reeled from the revelations. Families who had envied the Parkers' position now thanked their luck at having escaped their orbit. The city's social landscape shifted as long-standing alliances crumbled and carefully maintained fell away. Richard watched his family's legacy unravel with a mixture of horror and relief. The truth was ugly, but it was cleansing. Each exposed secret was another weight lifted, another chain broken in the cycle of corruption that had bound generations of Parkers. Emily Thompson stood at the gates of the Parker mansion, the morning fog shrouding the imposing structure in an ethereal haze. 3 months at the writer's retreat had changed her. There was a new steadiness in her stance, a quiet confidence in her eyes. The newspapers detailing the Parker family's exposed secrets were tucked under her arm, but she hadn't needed them to know it was time to return. Grace met her at the service entrance, their embrace fierce and long overdue. Victoria's locked herself in the 3rd-floor study, she whispered. She's been there since the federal agents left. Richard's in the library with the investigators. Emily nodded, taking in the changed atmosphere of the house. The staff moved differently now, no longer trying to be invisible. Pictures had been removed from walls, leaving telling shadows where the Parker family portraits had once hung. "How's my mother?" Emily asked, though she already knew the answer from Grace's daily updates. "Holding on." "The doctors say." Grace hesitated. "They say she's waiting for you?" Emily climbed the main staircase, no longer feeling like an intruder in the grand house. Each step brought memories of cleaning these floors, of secret glances exchanged with James, of the day Victoria had accused her of theft. But now those memories felt distant, like scenes from someone else's life. She found Richard in the library, surrounded by boxes of documents. He looked older, the weight of exposed family secrets evident in the new lines on his face. When he saw her, his expression transformed with a mixture of joy and apprehension. "Emily," he said softly, taking a step toward her but stopping, unsure of his welcome. "I read about everything she said. About Grandfather William, about Eleanor, about all of it. But I need to hear it from you." Richard gestured to a chair, but Emily remained standing. The time for playing by Parker rules was over. "I thought I was protecting you and your mother by staying away," he began, "but I was really protecting myself, from guilt, from responsibility, from having to face what my family really was." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of breaking glass from upstairs. Victoria's voice floated down, high and strange, as she argued with ghosts of her past. "She hasn't left the study in days," Richard explained. "Not since they found Thomas Montgomery's autopsy report." Emily's hand tightened on the newspaper. "I need to see her." "Emily, she's dangerous. More dangerous now than ever. She has nothing left to lose." But Emily was already moving toward the stairs. James appeared from the conservatory, reaching for her hand. "Let me come with you." The 3rd floor was silent except for Victoria's muffled voice. Emily paused outside the study door, feeling the weight of the moment. This confrontation had been building for 25 years, since before she was born. She knocked once, then pushed the door open. Victoria Parker stood at the window, still elegant despite her disheveled appearance. The study was a chaos of scattered papers and broken objects, evidence of her unraveling laid bare. So Victoria said, without turning, the prodigal daughter returns. Come to witness your victory. This isn't about winning, Emily replied, her voice steady. It's about truth, about justice for my mother, for James's father, for everyone you've hurt. Victoria laughed, a brittle sound. Justice? You're more naive than your mother. Do you think exposing the Parker secrets makes you better than us? You're Richard's daughter. You have the same capacity for ruthlessness in your blood. We're not defined by blood, Emily said quietly. We're defined by choices, and I choose to be my mother's daughter. Victoria finally turned, her mask cracking to reveal the desperation beneath. I built this family's power for 25 years. Everything I did was to protect the Parker legacy. Your mother was weak. She would have destroyed everything with her common morality and simple values. My mother survived your poison for 25 years, Emily countered. That's not weakness. That's the kind of strength you'll never understand. Victoria moved suddenly, reaching for something in her desk drawer. James stepped forward protectively, but Emily held up her hand. Go ahead, she said calmly. Whatever you're planning, whatever final scheme you've prepared, do it. But know that it won't change anything. The truth is out. Your power is gone. And I'm not afraid of you anymore. Victoria's hand trembled, then dropped. For the first time, she looked her age, a woman who had spent her life building walls only to be trapped within them. You've won, Victoria whispered, sinking into her chair. Just make it quick. But Emily was already turning away. Quick would be mercy, she said from the doorway, and you showed none to my mother. She left Victoria there, surrounded by the wreckage of her schemes, and went to do what she'd really come home for, to be with her mother, to rebuild her family, to create something new from the ashes of the Parker legacy. The storm that swept through Boston that night seemed to mirror the turmoil within the Parker mansion. Rain lashed against windows and wind howled through the garden where James had once tended his roses. Victoria Parker stood at the window of her third-floor study, watching lightning illuminate the grounds where her carefully constructed world had crumbled. Hours after her confrontation with Emily, Victoria began methodically burning documents, feeding papers into the antique fireplace one by one. Each flame consumed another piece of evidence, another fragment of her power. The smoke curled up the chimney, carrying with it decades of secrets and schemes. Mrs. Hudson noticed the smell of smoke first. Something's burning on the third floor, she told Richard and Emily, who were sitting with Sarah in the library. The acrid scent of burning paper and photographs filled the upper hallway. When they reached Victoria's study, they found her standing precariously on the window ledge, rain soaking through her designer dress. The room behind her was thick with smoke, ashes of her burned documents swirling in the wind that howled through the open window. Victoria, Richard called out carefully, "Come back inside." She turned to face them, her perfect makeup running in dark streams down her cheeks. "You think you've won," she said, her voice barely audible over the storm. "You think exposing everything makes you righteous. But you're all just as corrupt as I am. You just haven't admitted it to yourselves yet." Emily stepped forward slowly. "Nobody needs to get hurt anymore. It's over." Victoria laughed, the sound lost in a crack of thunder. "Over? Nothing's ever over. Ask your mother. Ask Thomas Montgomery. There are always consequences." Lightning flashed again, illuminating Victoria's face in harsh white light. For a moment she looked almost peaceful. "I won't let you write the ending to my story," she said. Before anyone could reach her, Victoria turned and reached for an ornamental finial just beyond the window frame. But the rain had made the stones slick, and her grip slipped. There was a moment, brief but eternal, where she seemed to hang suspended, her expression changing from determination to surprise. The sound of her fall was lost in the storm. Later, the police would rule it an accident, though questions would always remain. Had she meant to fall? Was she reaching for escape or embracing finality? The answer died with her on the rain-soaked grounds of the mansion she had fought so hard to control. They found her red notebook clutched in her hand, its pages soaked and running with ink, her last secrets dissolving in the rain. Her final act had been to destroy the evidence that could have answered so many questions, taken so many others down with her. The garden where she fell would later be transformed into a memorial not for Victoria, but for all those whose lives had been damaged by the Parker family's decades of manipulation. James would plant white roses there, symbols of new beginnings growing from tragic soil. The media descended like vultures, of course. Parker wife's tragic end dominated headlines for weeks. Speculation ran rampant about suicide, murder, accident. But those who had been there that night kept the true story to themselves. Emily stood in that same window the next morning, looking down at the place where Victoria had fallen. The storm had washed everything clean, leaving no trace of the previous night's tragedy. Just as Victoria would have wanted it, no evidence, no loose ends, no messy aftermath to tarnish her final performance. She chose her ending, Richard said quietly, joining Emily at the window, just like she chose everything else in her life. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Victoria's final act had been perhaps her only moment of genuine authenticity, her only unscripted scene in a life built on careful calculation and control. The revelation about Timothy came 3 days after Victoria's funeral, hidden in a letter found in her private safe. Dr. Anderson, still cooperating with investigators from his Canadian refuge, confirmed what the letter revealed: Timothy wasn't Richard's son at all. She was desperate, Dr. Anderson explained via video conference. The Parker dynasty needed an heir, and Victoria couldn't bear the thought of Emily being Richard's only child. She made arrangements with a private fertility clinic in Switzerland. The donor was carefully selected to match Richard's physical characteristics. The letter, written in Victoria's precise hand, detailed the elaborate deception. She had chosen a donor from old-money European aristocracy, ensuring the child would have the proper pedigree, even if its true parentage ever came to light. The timing of her pregnancy had been calculated to coincide with Richard's growing connection to Emily. Richard sat in his study, reading and rereading the letter. "She never even gave me a chance to be a father to Timothy," he said to Emily, who had stayed with him after the funeral. "Just like she helped take away my chance with you." Timothy, barely 6 months old, slept peacefully in the nursery, unaware of the turmoil surrounding his existence. The nanny who cared for him reported that Victoria had rarely visited the nursery, treating the baby more like a prop in her grand performance than a child. "What will happen to him now?" Emily asked, watching the infant sleep. Despite everything, she felt a connection to this small, innocent victim of Victoria's schemes. The legal implications were complex. Timothy's birth certificate listed Richard as the father, but the letter and Dr. Anderson's testimony proved otherwise. The donor had signed away all parental rights, believing he was helping an anonymous couple struggling with infertility. "He's innocent in all this," Richard said firmly. "Whatever Victoria did, Timothy doesn't deserve to suffer for her actions." Emily touched the baby's small hand, remembering her own childhood without a father. "He deserves a chance at a real family, one built on love, not lies." The decision they reached was unanimous. Richard would maintain his legal paternity of Timothy, giving the boy his name and inheritance rights equal to Emily's. The truth would never be hidden from him, but it would be shared with love and understanding when he was old enough to comprehend it. "We break the cycle," Emily declared. "No more secrets, no more lies. Timothy grows up knowing exactly who he is and how much he's loved." Grace, who had grown attached to the baby during her long hospital vigils with Sarah, offered to help care for him. "Every child deserves to be loved for themselves," she said, "not for what they represent." James designed a special corner of the garden where Timothy could play safely, away from the spot where Victoria had fallen. "Children should grow up with flowers," he said simply, planting a ring of bright, cheerful blooms. Sarah, when she was strong enough to hold the baby, cried tears of joy. "This is how family should be," she whispered, built on choice and love, not obligation and deceit. The media, of course, tried to sensationalize the revelation. Parker heir scandal competed with baby swap shock for headlines, but the family closed ranks, protecting Timothy from the publicity storm. Richard had lawyers draw up new documents ensuring Timothy's future was secure, regardless of his biological heritage. "He's my son," he told the board of directors firmly. "Any questions about his legitimacy will be considered a personal attack on the Parker family." In the end, Timothy's true parentage became just another thread in the complex tapestry of the Parker family story. But unlike the secrets that had come before, this one would be woven with honesty, acceptance, and love. The night Sarah Thompson's heart stopped for the third time, the hospital corridor became a battlefield between life and death. Dr. Martinez and her team worked frantically as monitors screamed their urgent warnings. Emily and Richard stood helplessly outside the room, watching through the glass as medical staff fought to bring Sarah back. 2 minutes without pulse, a nurse called out. The sound of the defibrillator charging filled the air. Emily gripped Richard's hand, their years of separation forgotten in this moment of shared terror. "We're losing her," Dr. Martinez's voice carried through the door. The medical team moved with practiced precision, but there was an edge of desperation to their actions. 3 minutes without pulse. Sarah's body arched as electricity coursed through her once, twice, 3 times. The monitors continued their ominous flatline tone. 4 minutes without pulse. Grace arrived, breathless from running up the stairs, clutching Sarah's favorite book. "She can't go," she whispered. "Not now. Not when we're finally all together." Inside the room, Dr. Martinez refused to give up. "One more time," she ordered, even as other staff members began to exchange knowing looks. 5 minutes without pulse. Then, impossibly, a beep. Weak at first, then stronger. Sarah's heart had started beating again, defying medical expectations and Victoria's careful plans. When Sarah opened her eyes hours later, she described floating above her body, watching the scene unfold below. She spoke of a light, of a peace she'd never known, but also of a choice. "I saw Thomas," she whispered to Emily. "He told me it wasn't my time yet, that there was more love waiting in this life than pain I'd endured." The experience changed something in Sarah. The fear that had haunted her for 25 years seemed to lift. She spoke more freely about the past, sharing stories of her love affair with Richard, of the early days of her pregnancy, of the hope that had sustained her through years of Victoria's poisoning. "I'm not afraid anymore," she told Richard during one of their quiet evening conversations. "Death showed me its face, and it was kinder than Victoria ever was." The near-death experience had another unexpected effect. Dr. Martinez discovered that the temporary cessation of Sarah's heart had somehow altered the way her body processed the residual toxins. "It's as if her system rebooted," she explained. "The damage isn't gone, but her body is responding to treatments differently now." Emily spent every possible moment at her mother's bedside, reading from the same books that had sustained them through years of poverty and illness. But now the stories took on new meaning, tales of resurrection, of second chances, of love conquering death itself. Sarah grew stronger day by day. Color returned to her cheeks, and her breathing became easier. The doctors were amazed by her recovery, but those who loved her saw it for what it was, a triumph of the spirit that Victoria had never managed to poison. "I came back for you," Sarah told Emily one evening. "For the chance to see you happy, to see you know your father, to hold my grandchildren someday." Death offered peace, but life offered love. And I chose love. In that sterile hospital room, surrounded by machines that had fought to save her life, Sarah Thompson had finally won her decades-long battle against Victoria's schemes. Not just by surviving, but by choosing to live fully, freely, without fear. As Sarah's recovery progressed, the Parker family lawyers presented Emily with a complex decision. The company's assets were being unfrozen, and as Richard's legitimate heir, Emily was entitled to claim her share of the Parker fortune immediately. However, doing so would trigger a clause in Victoria's meticulously crafted will that would strip Timothy of his inheritance rights. Emily sat in the mansion's library, surrounded by legal documents, watching Timothy play with his toys on the carpet. The baby's laughter echoed through the room that had once housed so many dark secrets. "It's rightfully yours," Richard insisted, his face drawn with concern. "You've suffered enough because of this family's mistakes. You shouldn't have to sacrifice anything more." But Emily had already made her decision. She picked up Timothy, holding him close as she signed the papers that would legally defer her inheritance until the baby turned 21. "Some things are worth more than money," she said simply. The sacrifice meant more than just waiting for her inheritance. It meant continuing to live modestly, working at the local library where she'd found a position in the children's section. It meant staying in her small apartment instead of moving into the mansion. It meant watching every penny as Sarah's medical bills continued to mount. James was furious when he learned of her decision. "After everything they put you through, you're giving up your rights." This is exactly what Victoria would have wanted. But Emily saw it differently. Victoria would have wanted us to fight over money, to let greed tear us apart like it did this family for generations. I'm choosing something else. I'm choosing to break the cycle. The media painted her decision in various lights, from saintly sacrifice to foolish naivety. Business magazines debated the financial implications, while society columns speculated about hidden motives. Emily ignored them all, focusing instead on building the kind of family she'd always dreamed of. She took Timothy to visit Sarah in the hospital every day, watching her mother's face light up as she taught the baby nursery rhymes. She helped James replant the mansion's gardens, creating spaces of beauty where there had once been only carefully maintained appearances. She worked with grace to convert Victoria's cold, formal rooms into warm, welcoming spaces. The sacrifice brought unexpected rewards. Without the weight of immediate wealth, Emily found freedom to discover who she truly was. She started writing children's books, drawing on the stories she told at the library. Her first book, about a little boy discovering his unconventional family, was dedicated to Timothy. Richard watched his daughter's choices with a mixture of pride and regret. "You're a better person than I ever was," he told her one evening. "You've taught me what real family means." Sarah understood her daughter's decision best. "Money doesn't make a family," she said, holding both Emily and Timothy during one of her stronger days. "Love does. And you, my brave girl, have always known that." Emily's sacrifice became a turning point in the Parker legacy. Instead of power and wealth, the family began measuring its worth in moments of joy, in acts of kindness, in the strength of bonds freely chosen rather than enforced. Someday, Emily told Timothy as she tucked him in each night, "You'll understand that the greatest inheritance isn't in bank accounts or property deeds. It's in the love we choose to give, the family we choose to be." The envelope arrived 6 months after Victoria's death, delivered by her private attorney, who had been instructed to wait until a specific date. Inside was a DVD and a handwritten letter dated the night before her fatal fall. Richard, Emily, Sarah, and James gathered in the library to watch it together. On the screen, Victoria appeared sitting at her desk in the third-floor study, impeccably dressed as always, but with something different in her eyes, a vulnerability none of them had seen before. "If you're watching this," she began, "then I've orchestrated my final exit exactly as planned. Some might call it cowardice, but I prefer to think of it as maintaining control until the end." She paused, touching the pearls at her neck, a nervous gesture so human it made Emily catch her breath. "There are truths that need to be told. Not for redemption, I'm beyond that, but for completion. The story you think you know isn't the whole truth." Victoria picked up an old photograph, showing it to the camera. It was of her as a young woman, standing beside her father. "I was raised to be a weapon," she said quietly. The Blackwood family's specialty wasn't just keeping secrets, it was using them. My father chose the Parker family as a target when I was 16. Everything that followed was orchestrated, including my chance meeting with Richard. Her confession continued, revealing layers of manipulation even Richard hadn't suspected. The initial attraction between Richard and Sarah hadn't been random. Victoria's father had engineered their meetings, knowing Richard's rebellious streak would draw him to someone outside his social circle. The plan was to let you fall in love, Victoria explained, then use that love to break you, to make you malleable, controllable. Sarah's pregnancy wasn't supposed to happen. It complicated everything, but in the end it served our purposes even better. She looked directly into the camera, her mask finally cracking. What I didn't expect was to fall in love with you, Richard. Really love you. It made everything harder and easier at the same time. Harder because I had to share your heart, easier because it gave me the strength to be truly cruel. The revelation about Thomas Montgomery's death came next. He discovered the truth not about Sarah, but about me. About why I was really placed in the Parker family. He was going to tell you everything, Richard. I couldn't let that happen. Not then. The accident wasn't planned, but when the opportunity presented itself, I took it. Tears began to fall, smearing her perfect makeup. The poisoning of Sarah, that was my father's idea initially. But I perfected it, made it an art form. I told myself it was necessary, that it was what I was raised to do. But the truth is, I enjoyed it. The power, the control, watching someone so good suffer so quietly. Victoria's voice broke. Emily, you were never supposed to exist. You were the flaw in our perfect plan. But watching you grow up in the shadows of this house, seeing Richard's strength and Sarah's grace in you, it drove me mad. You represented everything I could never be, everything I'd destroyed in myself. The confession ended with an unexpected twist. The evidence you found, the secrets you've uncovered, they're not even half of it. In the basement of the Blackwood summer house, behind the wine cellar, there's a room. Everything is there, every plot, every crime. Every manipulation going back 3 generations. The combination is the date you first came to work at the mansion, Emily, because in the end you were the key to everything. The screen went black, leaving them sitting in stunned silence. The letter contained just one more line: the truth will set you free, but first it will break your heart. Consider this my final gift, the complete destruction of everything I helped build. The discovery of Harold Parker's true will occur during the renovation of the mansion's west wing. Behind a loose panel in what had once been his private study, James found a safe that wasn't listed in any of the house's architectural plans. The combination puzzled them at first until Sarah recognized the numbers as the date of the country club's annual midsummer gala, the night she had first met Richard. Inside they found a document that would reshape their understanding of the Parker legacy once again. My true last will and testament, the document began in Harold Parker's distinctive handwriting, to be opened only upon the return of love to this house of power. Harold Parker, it seemed, had seen more than anyone suspected. His will contained detailed observations of his son William's corruption, of Victoria's manipulation, and most surprisingly, of Sarah and Richard's love affair. I watched my son destroy the one pure thing that could have saved this family, he wrote. I watched him choose power over love, just as I had done in my own time. But I lived long enough to see my mistake, to understand that empires built on fear eventually crumble. The will reversed many of William's financial decisions. Harold had secretly maintained a separate fortune, untouched by the family's corrupt dealings. This money, he specified, was to go to the first Parker who chooses love over power along with a controlling interest in the company. My grandson Richard stands at a crossroads, the will continued. If he finds the strength to choose love, whether through his own heart or through his children, then the Parker legacy might still be redeemed. Emily sat in Harold's old chair, reading his words about her mother. Sarah Thompson represents everything our family has forgotten: integrity, genuine love, the courage to stand firm in the face of power. If she carries Richard's child, as I suspect she does, that child represents hope for our family's redemption. The discovery sent shockwaves through the family's legal team. Harold's separate fortune had grown substantially over the decades, managed by trustees who had maintained absolute secrecy. With this will, both Emily and Timothy's futures were secured independently of the contested family assets. But more valuable than the money was the collection of letters Harold had left behind. He had documented everything, creating a parallel history of the Parker family that countered William and Victoria's version. His observations were precise, compassionate, and tragically too late to prevent the damage done to Sarah and Richard. "I should have spoken up," he wrote in his final letter. "Should have fought my own son's corruption, Victoria's schemes, the destruction of true love. My silence makes me as guilty as they are. But perhaps, through this will, I can offer some small redemption." Richard found himself weeping as he read his grandfather's words about him as a young man. In Richard, I see the possibility of breaking this cycle of power and fear. When he looks at Sarah Thompson, I see the same light I once saw in myself before I chose wealth over love. I pray he makes a better choice. The will ended with a simple request: let this fortune be used to heal what our family has broken, to rebuild what we destroyed, to restore faith in the possibility of love triumphing over power. In the margins of the final page, in shaky handwriting from Harold's last days, was a personal note to Emily, whom he had never met but somehow known would exist to my great-granddaughter. "You are the answer to an old man's prayers. The love that created you is stronger than all our power. Never forget that." The truth about James Montgomery's connection to the Parker family emerged through a series of letters found in Thomas Montgomery's old toolbox, carefully preserved in the groundskeeper's cottage. James discovered them while packing up his father's belongings, each envelope dated and sealed, meant to be opened in sequence. "My son," the first letter began, "if you're reading this, then my suspicions about Victoria Parker were correct, and I've paid the price for knowing too much. But there's something you need to understand about why I stayed at the Parker estate, even when I knew the danger." The letters revealed that Thomas Montgomery had been more than just the Parker family's groundskeeper. He had been Harold Parker's confidant, trusted with knowledge that even Richard didn't possess. Harold had recognized in Thomas a kindred spirit, someone who valued truth and integrity over power and wealth. "Harold Parker saved my life," once Thomas wrote. "Not with money or influence, but with simple human kindness. He gave me this job when no one else would hire a disgraced soldier. He treated me like a man, not a servant. And in return I became his eyes and ears, watching as his own family descended into corruption." But the most startling revelation came in the final letter. Thomas Montgomery hadn't died trying to warn Sarah about Victoria's schemes. He had died protecting evidence that could have exposed the entire Parker-Blackwood conspiracy. The night of his accident, he had discovered proof that his own father, James's grandfather, had been murdered by the Blackwoods 30 years earlier. "The Montgomerys and Parkers have been connected for 3 generations," Thomas explained. "Your grandfather was Harold Parker's best friend in college. They both fell in love with the same woman, your grandmother. When she chose your grandfather, the Blackwoods saw it as an insult to their social standing. Your grandfather's hunting accident was their revenge." James sat in the cottage's small kitchen, reading how Harold Parker had secretly provided for his friend's widow and son, ensuring Thomas would always have a place at the estate. The gardens James now tended had been his father's way of honoring both families' legacy, creating beauty in a place darkened by corruption. "Your name for both of them," Thomas wrote. "James for your grandfather, Thomas for me. And if you're anything like either of us, you'll understand why the Parker estate needs people who remember what honor means." The final pages contained coordinates to a safety deposit box where Thomas had stored copies of all his evidence. "I've arranged for this to be delivered to you if anything happens to me. But remember, son, revenge isn't the answer. Harold Parker taught me that justice and healing can only come through truth and love." When James shared these letters with Emily and Richard, the pieces of their shared history fell into place. James's unwavering support, his dedication to the estate even after learning of Victoria's crimes, it wasn't just about honoring his father's memory. It was about fulfilling a legacy of loyalty and integrity that spanned generations. "Your father was a better man than I ever knew," Richard told James, his voice thick with emotion. "And you're your father's son in all the ways that matter." The gardens James had created, which had provided Emily such solace during her darkest days, took on new meaning. Each flower, each carefully tended path, represented not just his father's work, but 3 generations of men who chose honor over power, truth over wealth, love over fear. The Parker Mansion's grand dining room had been transformed. Gone were the imposing portraits and stuffy formality that had defined it for generations. Now sunlight streamed through uncovered windows, and the sound of laughter echoed off the walls as the newly formed family gathered for their first Sunday dinner together. Sarah, finally strong enough to leave the hospital, sat at the head of the table, a position that would have scandalized the old Parker society. Her eyes shone with joy as she watched Emily help Timothy with his food, while Richard and James discussed plans for the estate's future. Grace moved comfortably between kitchen and dining room, no longer a servant but family, bringing dishes she and Sarah had cooked together using old Thompson family recipes. The formal silver and china had been replaced with simple, warm pottery that invited people to linger and talk. "I never thought I'd see this room filled with genuine happiness," Mrs. Hudson remarked, allowing herself to join them at the table for the first time in 30 years of service. The Parkers always had dinner parties, but never family dinners. Richard watched his expanded family with wonder. "We're learning," he said softly, "all of us, learning what family really means." The conversation flowed naturally, touching on plans for the future. Emily shared ideas for turning part of the mansion into a community center for underprivileged children. James described his vision for expanding the gardens to include a public park and educational space. "The Parker name doesn't have to represent power anymore," Emily explained, bouncing Timothy on her knee. "It can stand for something better: healing, growth, second chances." Sarah reached for Richard's hand across the table, a gesture of forgiveness and new beginnings. "Sometimes love takes the longest route home," she said, "but it finds its way eventually." The healing wasn't instant or perfect. There were still moments of tension, old habits to unlearn, trust to rebuild. But each Sunday dinner became a step forward, a chance to replace memories of formal facades with genuine connections. William Parker, after much soul-searching, attended one of these dinners. His wheelchair was positioned where Harold's portrait had once hung, and he watched in silence as his son and granddaughter built the kind of family he had sacrificed for power. "I was wrong," he said simply, as Emily helped him with his dessert, "about everything that mattered." The staff, no longer bound by rigid hierarchy, began bringing their own families to these gatherings. The mansion's halls rang with children's laughter, with real conversations, with the messy, beautiful sound of genuine human connection. Timothy, too young to understand the significance, nevertheless thrived in this atmosphere of love and acceptance. He reached for Emily as easily as he did for Richard, recognizing no boundaries in his young heart. This Richard said one evening, looking around the table at their assembled family related by blood, choice, and shared history. "This is what my grandfather meant by the return of love to this house of power." The reconciliation extended beyond the mansion's walls. The Parker Foundation, under Emily's guidance, began reaching out to families hurt by past business practices, offering not just compensation but genuine apology and commitment to change. James and Emily's growing relationship, one scandal in the making, became a symbol of the family's transformation. Their love, born in the mansion's gardens and strengthened through shared struggles, represented everything the new Parker legacy stood for. "We're writing a new story," Emily told them all, raising her glass in a toast, "not erasing the past but learning from it, building something true on the ashes of all the pretense." The transformation in Sarah Thompson's health became a symbol of the family's healing. under Dr. Martinez's care, and free from Victoria's poisonous influence, Sarah grew stronger each day. Color returned to her cheeks, and her eyes regained their old sparkle, the same light that had first captured Richard's heart at the country club so many years ago. The mansion's library became Sarah's favorite room for recovery. She would sit in a comfortable armchair by the window, surrounded by books, watching the gardens where James worked. Richard often joined her there, making up for lost time with quiet conversations about literature, dreams, and their shared love of poetry. Emily found her mother writing again, first in journals, then starting work on a novel about resilience and second chances. The same passion for storytelling that had made her a beloved teacher began to flourish once more. Her students from years past, hearing of her recovery, sent letters and visited, filling the mansion with memories of lives she had touched. Timothy took his first steps in that library, toddling between Sarah and Richard while Emily captured the moment on camera. The baby's laughter seemed to chase away the last shadows of the mansion's dark history, replacing them with the simple joy of family milestones shared. "I never thought I'd see this," Sarah confessed one evening, watching Emily and James walk through the garden with Timothy. "Not just being well again, but being whole, having all the pieces of my heart in one place." The Swiss clinic's treatments proved unnecessary as Sarah's body, freed from continuous poisoning, began to heal itself. Dr. Martinez documented the recovery, calling it a testament to the human spirit's resilience. But those who loved Sarah knew it was more than medicine. It was the power of finally being surrounded by unconditional love. Richard transformed Sarah's old apartment into a community library, naming it after her. The place where she had struggled alone for so many years became a sanctuary for other single mothers, offering books, resources, and hope. "Some scars never fade," Sarah told Emily as they arranged books on the new library's shelves, "but they can become markers of survival rather than pain, reminders of what we've overcome, not what we've lost." The wedding took place in the mansion's gardens at sunset, among the roses James had tenderly cultivated. Unlike the Grand Parker weddings of the past, this celebration was intimate and genuine. White paper lanterns hung from the trees, their soft light mingling with the golden evening sun. Emily wore a simple white dress, carrying a bouquet of flowers from the garden James had planted for her. Sarah helped her daughter prepare in what had once been Victoria's dressing room, now transformed into a bright, welcoming space filled with family photographs and cherished memories. Richard walked Emily down the aisle, his eyes glistening with tears of joy. The path was lined with the same white roses that had witnessed their first conversations, their shared struggles, their growing love. Timothy toddled ahead as ring-bearer, scattering petals with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Grace had decorated the garden arch with wildflowers, deliberately avoiding the formal arrangements that had once defined Parker events. Mrs. Hudson sat in the front row, finally free to show her emotions openly, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. James and Emily wrote their own vows, speaking of love born in hardship, strength found in adversity, and the beauty of choosing each other every day. Their words honored both their personal journey and the larger story of healing that their love represented. Sarah read a passage from the poetry book she and Richard had once shared at the country club, her voice strong and clear, a testimony to her recovery. Richard spoke about love's power to transform, his words carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. During the exchange of rings, Timothy spontaneously hugged both Emily and James, drawing laughter from the gathered guests. This unscripted moment perfectly captured the spirit of their new family, warm, inclusive, and genuinely joyful. The celebration that followed was unlike any previous Parker event. Instead of formal dining and rigid social protocols, there was dancing under the stars, shared laughter, and genuine celebration. The mansion staff joined in as equals, the old barriers finally and completely dissolved. As James and Emily shared their first dance, Sarah leaned against Richard's shoulder, watching their daughter's happiness. "This," she whispered, "this is what love was always meant to look like." Richard Parker's redemption began not with grand gestures but with quiet acts of restitution. He appeared before the board of Parker Enterprises not as a commanding figure, but as a man humbled by truth and transformed by love. "The Parker legacy isn't in our wealth or influence," he told them. "It's in what we choose to do with our second chances." He announced a complete restructuring of the company, establishing a substantial fund to compensate those who had suffered from the family's past misdeeds. The mansion's transformation into a community center made headlines, but it was Richard's personal involvement that touched people's hearts. He could be found reading to children in the library named after Sarah, working alongside James in the public gardens, or mentoring young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. And local media, initially skeptical, began documenting the changes. They wrote about former employees receiving not just financial compensation, but personal apologies. They covered the establishment of the Thomas Montgomery Memorial Scholarship, providing education opportunities to children of service workers. When interviewed about his transformation, Richard always redirected attention to others, to Emily's vision for the foundation, to James's work in the community gardens, to Sarah's strength and forgiveness. His humility, so different from the old Parker pride, proved more powerful than any public relations campaign. The business community watched in amazement as Parker Enterprises became a model of corporate responsibility. Richard implemented transparent practices, ethical guidelines, and worker-friendly policies that set new standards for other companies to follow. At Timothy's first birthday celebration, held in the newly opened community center, Richard made a speech that captured his journey. True power, he said, isn't in what we can take from others, but in what we choose to give back. True wealth isn't in our bank accounts, but in the lives we touch and the love we share. Boston society, which had once shunned the Parkers after the scandal, began to see the family in a new light, not as fallen aristocrats, but as leaders in a different kind of legacy, one built on integrity, compassion, and genuine human connection. 1 year after Emily and James's wedding, the extended Parker-Thompson family gathered in the mansion's gardens for a photograph. The setting sun cast a golden glow over them all: Sarah and Richard, Emily and James, Grace and Mrs. Hudson, Timothy toddling between them, and even William in his wheelchair, transformed by redemption and forgiveness. The once imposing mansion had become a place of warmth and welcome. Children played freely in halls that had once echoed with secrets. The gardens, once symbols of rigid perfection, now bloomed with wild beauty under James's careful nurturing. The library, filled with Sarah's beloved books, offered sanctuary to anyone seeking wisdom or comfort. "Family isn't about blood or status," Emily wrote in the dedication of her first published book. "It's about the people who stand by us through darkness and light, who help us become our truest selves. Sometimes family is born, sometimes chosen, sometimes forged in the fires of adversity, but always bound together by love." The Parker legacy had been transformed. No longer did it represent power, wealth, and social position. Instead, it stood for redemption, for the courage to face truth, for the strength to choose love over fear. The mistakes of the past weren't forgotten, but they had become stepping stones toward a better future. Sarah's recovery continued to inspire others. Her story of survival, of maintaining dignity and hope through years of suffering, touched countless lives. Richard's journey from power to humility showed that it's never too late to choose a different path. Emily and James's love proved that healing is possible, that joy can grow in the most unexpected places. Timothy would grow up knowing a different kind of wealth, not of money or influence, but of unconditional love and authentic connections. His family story would teach him that true strength lies not in power over others, but in the courage to be vulnerable, to forgive, to love without conditions. As the photographer captured that moment in the garden, the legacy of Victoria's schemes, William's ambition, and generations of Parker pride faded it into history. In their place stood something far more valuable: a family bound not by obligation or appearances, but by choice and love, proving that even the deepest wounds can heal when touched by genuine forgiveness and unconditional acceptance. The evening light caught the tears in Sarah's eyes as she looked at her gathered family. "This," she whispered to Richard, "this is what we were always meant to be." Dear viewers, we hope this story has touched your heart and resonated with your own experiences of family, forgiveness, and love. We'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings about Emily and the Parkers' journey in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and would like to support our team's efforts to create more meaningful content, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support enables us to continue crafting narratives that explore the complexities of human relationships and personal growth. Please share this video with friends and family who might find comfort or inspiration in this tale of redemption and unconditional love. Don't forget to like this video to help others discover this story. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community. Your engagement makes these stories come alive.